He's a... crap line. What's one show that you always wish you were a bigger fan of? One that was immensely popular that you know is still remembered quite fondly to this day, and is considered one of the greats? Well, for me, that show was always Danny Phantom. Seems shocking, right? I mean, I'm the Fairly OddParents guy. I've talked about that series for like, what, 10 hours on this goddamn channel? Only natural to assume that Danny Phantom would be right up my alley given they share the same creator, Butch Hartman. Reality is, 2-year-old me just wasn't interested in action cartoons. I was way more obsessed with SpongeBob and the sorts. I would get so mad when Nick would air Avatar: The Last Airbender. I did not want to give that series the time of day, and Danny Phantom was similar. My only real exposure to the franchise came from my obsession with those bad Nicktoon crossover games, which I've talked about extensively, where SpongeBob SquarePants, Jimmy Neutron, Timmy Turner, and Danny Phantom would all get sucked into the same adventure, needing to team up to defeat their respective villains, or whatever monster of the week threatens their world. Look, they're 10 out of 10s in my heart. I'm not sure if I've talked about this anywhere before, but Volcano Island was my first game in that series, where Jimmy Neutron was simply a background character. He wasn't playable at all, he just communicated over some fucking thing. And so when I went to the store and my dad let me get SpongeBob and Friends Unite, presumably because it was in the bargain bin, while we were then sitting in the women's clothes store waiting for my mom to be finished, he pointed at the box art and said, "Look, Mark, you can play as Jimmy Neutron in this one." And me, being filled with my 6-year-old angst, scoffed and replied, "Puh, I know, Dad. Like, what am I, some kind of idiot who can't see the box art?" And so I want to send out a formal apology to my dad for being so rude. This indifference towards Danny Phantom continued for a while, until one day when I went to my great-grandmother's house to do homework after school. I sat down in her living room, had a little tray with my notebooks all laid out ready to tackle the frightening world of basic multiplication. And that's when I turned on the TV and saw,
"To save the future, Danny Phantom must perish."
Wait, no, go back! What the fuck was that? And I never found out because I was a dumb kid who didn't know how to torrent stuff on the internet. But see, now I'm a dumb adult who knows how to torrent stuff on the internet. And so when's a better time than the present to finally delve into the series that I never really tried giving the time of day as a kid? Probably gonna take a while though if Fairly OddParents was anything to go by. That took me like a month to watch through, and that was multiple hours every day. I can only imagine how long Danny Phantom— this show only has 55 episodes? That is genuinely baffling to me. For years it seemed as if Danny Phantom was everywhere, but no. Apparently the show only lasted a short 3 years. Which admittedly may seem like a lot now, with every show getting the axe after one season. You're lucky to get 2 these days. And not one of those season 2s where they just make the staff produce 1 season and then cut it up for release like with the Cuphead show or Sonic Prime. But at the time, especially with a creator as successful as Butch Hartman, 55 episodes seems like such a major disappointment. Considering that his next cartoon, Tough Puppy, was way less culturally impactful as Danny Phantom, yet managed to run for a bit longer. You beat Bunsen as a beast though, so bronze medal. Going in, I'm really curious how the series managed to have such staying power with such few episodes. To this day, I always see fan art, discussions, and merchandise surrounding the series, so I'm interested in seeing just what it was about this show that stuck with so many people. I have heard warnings, however, that the love for Danny Phantom primarily comes from the first 2 seasons, with the third being considered a huge disappointment, especially with the finale. Apparently, they dropped the ball hard. And so I suppose with that, let's check out the rise and unexpected fall of Danny Phantom. And get ready, because we're talking about it all. How it started, the folks questioning Butch's involvement, its awful finale, the video games, the lack of merch, store shootings, which are for some reason relevant. Although I'm not going to do that thing where I talk about every single episode in excruciating detail, just describing every single scene in order. However, I think you could assume from the length of this video that I'm still covering everything, but I don't know, I think this should be more than a glorified fandom wiki description. Luckily for me though, there's surprisingly a lot to talk about. A lot more than I had assumed at least. So with that, let's get into it. Our story begins with a young man named Elmer, who desperately wanted to break into the animation industry. Despite getting a couple intern gigs while attending Cal Arts, nothing seemed to be sticking, getting fired from a storyboarding position on My Little Pony after biting off more than he could chew. The main reasoning being, he had never storyboarded before.
Wah, wah, wah. Will you cut that out?
Eventually, he managed to land a position at Hanna-Barbera thanks to the help of one Fred Seibert, the studio's then president. And with this new job, Elmer would gradually rise the ranks, leading him to writing, directing, and storyboarding episodes for many of Cartoon Network's most iconic series, such as Dexter's Laboratory and Johnny Bravo. With his contract ending, however, Elmer decided he would leave Cartoon Network, following Fred to help develop cartoons for his newly opened studio, Fred Reader. Oh, sorry, I mean... And that is when our story can truly begin. See, Elmer isn't this dork. Instead, he goes by his childhood nickname, Butch. From here, Butch received immense success after the premiere of his shorts for Oh Yeah Cartoons, featuring this little-known series called The Fairly Odd Parents. No, not that one. Yeah, there we go. Okay, this is a lot less catchy. The Fairly Odd Parents was a near instant hit, and after a short run of shorts, Butch was given the green light to turn it into a full-fledged series, which we all know would go on to run for 16 long years. The Fairly Odd Parents to this day remains one of the longest animated programs ever, still somehow managing to pull itself out of its coffin every few years. Which is surprising considering The Fairly Odd Parents initially wasn't even something Butch was all that invested in. As a matter of fact, it didn't even exist until the day he was due to submit his Oh Yeah Cartoons idea. It was complete luck, right place at the right time. And that's in no way to disparage the work put into it, because as we all know, I'm quite fond of The Fairly Odd Parents. You know, just a little bit. But this wasn't Butch's passion project. This isn't where his main interests lay. That was instead in the adjacent realm of comic books. And more importantly, superheroes. While Butch pursued a career in animation, it's no secret from looking at his social medias that he loves superheroes, talking about them, drawing them, playing with his toys of them. He's a fanatic. I mean, all you have to do is go back and watch the first couple of seasons of Fairly Odd Parents and you realize there are superheroes everywhere in that series. The Crimson Chin, Crash Nebula, each with their own sets of heroes and villains. He gave Timmy his own hero persona, he wore his influence on his sleeve. Really makes you wonder, what would it be like if Butch Hartman tried to create a superhero show? Well, he tried with a spin-off of Crash Nebula, and guess what? It sucked! That episode is boring. Anyways, while this Crash Nebula spin-off series went nowhere, it couldn't have kept Butch down for too long, because just 3 months earlier, we saw the premiere of his brand new Nicktoon.
Nickelodeon's newest Nicktoon is going.
If you find it weird that Butch would decide to pitch two different but similar in tone superhero shows to the same network at the same time, well, you'd be right, if that's what actually happened. See, despite airing in 2004, Danny Phantom had been conceived as far back as 2001 after Butch heard rumors around the studio that the higher-ups were looking for a new boys action cartoon. With that, he had one goal in mind: to come up with a cool name. Yeah, really. Butch figured that if he could think of a name cool enough, a name so awesome, that there was no way Nick couldn't pass up on it. And with that, he envisioned a Scooby-Doo-esque cartoon named Danny Phantom and the Spectre Detectors, before presumably realizing how lame that sounded, reformatting it to become a comic book-inspired action show, shortened simply to Danny Phantom. Butch ended up being completely right about his assumption too, as in 2001 during a dinner meeting with a Nickelodeon executive, he was asked if he had any more cartoon ideas, to which he responded with basically an elevator pitch. And surprisingly, it was picked up then and there, no questions asked. Production started now with a goal to get the pilot done by March. And they hit the ground running. Butch moved a lot of his existing staff from the Fairly Odd Parents to his new project, including bringing over Odd Parents character designer Steven Silver to become the lead character designer for Danny Phantom. With this new team, they got hard at work, getting the pilot ready to be later released in April of 2004. Wait, you said done by March? That meeting was in 2001, but the series didn't premiere until 2004? Well, yes. Let me get there. See, while Danny Phantom initially had a deadline of March, some troubles arose during its production which caused it to suffer an extensive delay when it came to being aired. The primary reason being that some of the higher-ups at Nickelodeon had since left the network, with their replacements choosing to sit on it for a while. Either until they felt it was the right time, or perhaps they simply weren't interested since it was conceived before they got there. I feel executives would want to proudly proclaim that they were the person to hand-select the show that would become an insane hit. It's also worth considering that Nickelodeon probably just bought the series in 2001, not that the pilot actually got finished around that time. It's more than likely Nickelodeon bought the rights to the series, held onto it for a while before doing anything, and then started production on the show in like 2003. But for whatever reason, Danny Phantom just got put in the back burner until its eventual premiere in 2004. However, that's not to say that Nickelodeon put no hype into the release of this series. Quite the contrary, there were ads all over the network, along with them choosing to premiere it directly after the Kids' Choice Awards. May not seem like it now, but the Kids' Choice Awards were massive back in the 2000s and early 2010s. I would get so excited to watch these every year. And so airing their brand new series when they knew they'd have a lot of eyes on them was an incredibly smart decision. And so with that long history out of the way, I suppose it's time to actually talk about the series itself. Just how did they go about introducing us to this world of Danny Phantom? Danny Phantom stars Danny Fenton, your average 14-year-old boy. Along with his two friends, Tucker Foley and Sam Manson, they all attend Casper High together. Wink. Except there's one thing that makes Danny more unique than the other guys at school.
He's a phantom.
See, a month before the pilot, Danny got exposed to the ghost portal that his parents had been building in their basement, them being ghost hunters. And because of this, his molecules got all rearranged, allowing him to transform into the ghost-human hybrid Danny Phantom. Which is lucky, as this new ghost portal winds up being exactly what starts allowing ghosts to leave the dreaded ghost zone, to wreak havoc all over the town of Amity Park. I find it interesting that this pilot doesn't choose to begin with an origin story for Danny, already beginning with him having his ghost powers. Also, get ready for me to say ghost a whole lot throughout this video, try not to get too scared, alright? The reason for this was probably because serialization in cartoons was still relatively uncharted territory at the time, at least for a massive network like Nickelodeon. With these shows designed to catch the attention of kids whatever time of day, with the hopes of bringing in more and more fans over time, it wasn't seen as that smart of a move to create a one continuous story that could potentially alienate a kid who was thrust into the middle of an arc they have no context for. That's why series would always do that thing, previously on the Baba Booey Show. And really, anything you would need to grasp from a Danny Phantom origin is already explained in the intro. You know, Danny Phantom, he was just 14 when his parents built a very strange machine. God bless you, Butch Hartman, for only being able to create theme songs that's just some guy singing the synopsis of the series. Speaking of, the intro to Danny Phantom is sweet. Fairly Odd Parents will always hold a special place in my heart, but even I have to admit that, even just purely visually, Danny Phantom's intro sequence rocks. You know, a lot more than Bunsen is a beast, I guess.
Not a bear and not a yeti.
Holy heck, that's just confetti!
Was Danny Phantom a fluke? The colors at the start are fun. I love that shot of him hiding in the shadows. It's just got a lot of incredibly well animated and fun sequences, with the rap theme also being super catchy. You know it's a good intro when, despite having never even seen your show before, I'm still able to recite the thing word for word. Just wish it didn't forever have to end with that atrociously loud splat effect.
Danny Phantom.
Something interesting worth noting, however, a factoid I'm sure every Danny Phantom fan is already aware of, is that this wasn't the original intro for the show. With there existing an original title sequence that was fully composed and even storyboarded, yet for whatever reason got replaced. People always say it's because it sounds like Ghostbusters, but I haven't been able to find that officially backed up anywhere. I mean, everything sounds like the Ghostbusters theme if you try hard enough. In fact, I'll prove that point. Because Butch Hartman stated that the original theme was heavily inspired by an entirely different song, The Invisible Man by Queen. I can't play it for you for obvious reasons, but if you go and listen to it... Okay, go do that now. You back? See, it sounds like the Ghostbusters theme, right? If you want my game theory as to why it was changed, I think it was for no other reason than it working better as an introduction to the show. After the first half of it plays out, it jumps right back into the tune that was kept for the final. The only real difference between the two is one not including the breakdown of how he got his powers. Someone involved, maybe Nick, maybe Butch, probably wanted to include a more descriptive origin for Danny and so decided to add it in. Also, since we're on the intro, here's a question. Is it young or yo? Okay, I was gonna make a whole segment deciphering this, but it's not even up for debate, it's yo. See, Butch Hartman apparently wanted to address the biting question that had everyone on the edge of their seats. In the Danny Phantom theme song, is the rapper saying young or yo?
Young Danny Phantom, he was just 14 when his...
Butch is convinced that he's saying young, even making an entire 8-minute video dedicated to the subject. Although you would guess it was something much more severe from how it was titled.
Yo, Danny Fenton, he was just 14. Well, if you said that, you are incorrect.
Just listen to it.
Young Danny Phantom, he was just 14.
Like, he's obviously saying, yo, there's no discussion to be had. He can't help himself to try correct people on this.
By the way, in the theme song, it's not Yo Danny Fenton, it's Young Danny Fenton. Just saying. Anyway, I wrote the song, so I know.
But it's yo, there's no other way around it. Once again, Game Theory Head is on. Butch claims he wrote the script for the Danny Phantom theme, and I have no reason to not believe him on that. The last thing Butch Hartman would ever do is lie, so I can only imagine that he wrote the word young into the script with that being the plan, but whenever the rapper that got landed in the booth, he or someone else there probably thought yo would work better, or perhaps they find it redundant to specify Danny as young when they already reveal his age 6 words later. Whatever reason, something got lost in translation, and Butch You just gotta accept it. The purpose of any good pilot, in my opinion, should be to establish the status quo. It should be a baseline scenario for the characters to deal with. You know, SpongeBob has to tackle an intense lunch rush. Timmy makes a wish that goes horribly wrong. Jimmy creates an invention that goes horribly wrong. So in that regard, I think the pilot to Danny Phantom is great. They had an easy job here given its Monster of the Week formula, so all they really had to do was set up that Danny has ghost powers and has to deal with balancing that alongside his school life. The two often interconnecting. They do that incredibly well, showcasing how Danny has been struggling to control his powers, clearly not having a handle on them yet, which creates a lot of tense situations for him given his parents are literal ghost hunters. The main thing I believe they accomplish well here is setting up the characters. You get an immediate feel for the dynamic between all these guys. Not just with Danny's family, you know, the idiot dad Jack, more competent mom Maddie, and his caring daughter sister Jazz, who they make very obviously aware of Danny's ghost powers, but just doesn't want to talk about it yet.
I'll drive you to school.
Jasmine never offers to drive Danny to school.
That's not our daughter. That's a ghost.
But we mostly spend time getting to know Danny's relationship with his friends. Tucker is your average tech geek, although I'd argue you don't get much of an idea of that here. It's more so a focal point later on throughout the season. Most of his introduction is spent on highlighting his conflicting ideals with Sam. She's the token goth kid who everyone in school thinks is a freak. I'm not usually super fond of this archetype, but I find that most of the time these characters tend to all blend together, being no different than Raven from Teen Titans. But honestly, I think Sam is one of the best cases of this stereotype I've ever seen, because they never let the fact that she's goth take up her whole personality. She's got plenty of other traits too. For example, this introduction is used to show off her environmentalist side, trying to get the school to go vegan. She's like Raven mixed with Lisa Simpson, perfect. The star though is Danny, of course. And it's through him you really get to see the main inspiration Butch has been pulling from, that being Spider-Man.
Pizza time.
Really, all you have to do to tell the comic book influence is look no further than the title cards, featuring colorful, exciting comic covers representing what the episode is about. They all look amazing and do a lot in making the show stand out. I just hope they don't get lazy with this as they go on, like with the Fairly Odd Parents. They just abused that model sheet PNG of Timmy. Really, Danny is almost identical to Peter Parker. A lot of superhero stuff features the trope of the hero attempting to keep their identity a secret, but Spider-Man is by far the most famous case of that in relation to a teenager. You know, all these other guys are adults, they don't have to worry about saving the world and getting to school on time. But you could tell that Danny, even if unintentionally, she has a lot of similar traits to Peter. Mainly all the little comic booky Marvel one-liners that we will soon see plagues Danny Phantom. Although I do find it to be a fun detail that because he's new to these powers, he's not as quick on his feet when it comes to the insults he flings.
I command you to go away!
That's really the whole point of this introduction, to show Danny taking on his first real threat and to gradually have him become more competent in fighting with his ghost powers. Acting quite clumsy early on and more often than not using his abilities to escape danger, until the end when he finally takes on the villain head-on, saving the school. Overall, it's an incredibly well-rounded beginning that sets up the characters pretty well while establishing how you can expect each episode to go. However, in a lot of ways I unfortunately believe it to be the weakest episode in the entire season. And now in some ways that's a good thing. This being my least favorite episode out of the initial 20 means there's nowhere to go but up, right? But at the same time, it reminds me why I never checked out Danny Phantom before now. And it's because I've watched this first episode like 3 times over the past couple years, and kept calling it quits by the end. Not only do I think the formula here is a little repetitive, pretty consistently repeating the pattern of showing Danny at home, going to school and talking to his friends until the ghost attacks, and he has a short Y7 fight with it before it runs away or escapes. Only to repeat the cycle tomorrow. I just don't care about this conflict. Not only do I not care about the ghost here being a mere lunch lady mad about them changing the menu for the first time in forever, but because Danny is inexperienced, it means that the action isn't all that great. Mainly just being scenes of Danny zipping around the place trying to save his friends. It's all for the purpose of building to that final fight where he manages to defeat it and all its minions, which is pretty cool. But let's just say the anticipation of that finale doesn't exactly have me on the edge of my seat. See, Danny Phantom isn't just an action show, it's also a comedy. And if my Fairly Odd Parents videos are anything to go by, I don't exactly think Butch is all that funny. There's a lot of funny moments, sure, some great bits throughout the show.
My dreams were shattered years ago.
How many years ago?
How old are you?
But I more so liked it for the character stuff, seeing how they all worked off each other. And sadly, I don't think Danny Phantom's pilot does a stellar job at that either. Like I said, the lunch lady ghost is pissed off because someone changed the menu, that someone being Sam, trying to force her vegetarianism onto the school, which pisses off Tucker. As his character trait for this episode is that he loves meat, something which I don't ever recall coming back. Because of that, they're constantly arguing with each other throughout the entire episode, Danny being stuck in the middle of it and not knowing what to do. And while it does a good job at showing off their differences, at the same time it feels to consider that I actually have to see why these guys are all hanging out with each other in the first place. Well, at least some reason other than they're the geeks. Still, though, it's a fine introduction. I just think there's much better to come in the future.
Whatever you say.
Butch must have been quite fond of this format for a pilot, though, because it's something he would forever try to recapture as his career at Nickelodeon ended. He made a bunch of backdoor pilots for this app he used to run called the Noog Network. None of them ever went anywhere, but it's clear he was trying to recapture the magic that was Danny Phantom through them. Particularly that opening scene, immediately giving expository dialogue to establish all the characters, have something actiony happen, then end on a joke. The main one that comes to mind is this one called Imaginathan, which he really seemed to want to make.
How's the, jar collection going?
Fine, Dad.
I have sat through more Butch Hartman content than I care to admit. But something I noticed, which is honestly a little sad, is that it always comes off like the success of the Fairly OddParents is something that's always held him back as a creator. Seeing him talk about his passion projects versus what actually releases. The pattern always seems to be that Butch has an idea for a cool hero action show that he wants to do and is incredibly passionate about. But somewhere along the way, he's forced to restructure his concept to be a comedy instead. Like, here's Butch's idea for Imaginathan versus what actually came out. I don't know, it's just food for thought. Not incredibly relevant, but it's something that's always been interesting to me. That Danny Phantom was the closest Butch has ever gotten to releasing a project he was truly passionate about. Either way, let's start to actually delve into Season 1 after a fairly mediocre introduction in my opinion, to discover when Danny Phantom finally gets its groove. Season 1 of Danny Phantom is almost entirely episodic in terms of plot setups, usually attempting to find a way to combine an average kid scenario with the action and adventure of his ghost hunting duties. We get stories like Danny learning not to use his powers to fight back against his bullies or else he risks becoming one himself, understanding that he can't take his friends for granted, or learning not to show off and boast about his new abilities so much as it risks inciting jealousy and envy between his buddies. All stuff you've seen before, but the ghost angle really does a lot in regards to helping it stand apart from the crowd. Really, other than SpongeBob, that was how a lot of these Nickelodeon cartoons from the time approached story structure. Fairly OddParents, Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron, My Life as a Teenage Robot. These are all shows that cover the same plot points and lessons, but they each have a gimmick to help ensure that they don't all blend together, feeling like the exact same cartoon. However, Danny does have the action aspect, which we didn't see as often, and thankfully it's something that greatly improves from the pilot, with how much more Danny becomes accustomed to using his powers. Over the course of the first season, we see him gain quite a few new abilities, like this neat ghost ray or being able to possess others. Oh, sorry, did I say possess? I mean overshadow others. I'm not sure if I just wasn't noticing when they did mention it, but they at least rarely use the word possession. And I have to wonder if that was a network thing. I'm sure with a subject as touchy as the afterlife and ghosts, there were probably some limitations as to what they could explicitly talk about. Or maybe it was simply Butch being weird about it because, as we're gonna see well later, after the show was cancelled, he could not stop running his mouth with these dumb retcons, such as claiming that none of the ghosts in the series are actually the spirits of dead people, and instead, that they're just monsters from another dimension. These ghosts right here, these characters who are explicitly shown to have had past lives with official backstories as to how they died, not ghosts, monsters. Through getting to spend more time with these characters, I really find myself growing more attached to Danny, Sam, and Tucker. I really like their relationships with each other, especially Danny. He's without a doubt my favorite character, which I guess is a good thing for a show called Danny Phantom. It's weird, even though I never watched the series as a kid, I always liked Danny as a character. Again, through those crossover games, he was just so likable. And I love that in Volcano Island, they really fixated on the relationship between him and SpongeBob. They were best friends.
Look, it's over there! Wow, it's beautiful.
Dude, it's an espresso machine.
The one thing I can never get past, though, is his voice. I like it, don't get me wrong, David Kaufman does an amazing job. He has such a charming way of enunciating words. And I think it's really funny that Danny shares a voice actor with Stuart Little of all characters.
Hi there, I'm Stuart. I'm glad you could come by to play some games with me. We're gonna have lots of fun, I just know it.
But my god, he does not sound like a kid at all. It's not a detriment or anything, but I can never not hear him and picture a 40-year-old man doing the voice. Something I haven't talked about yet that's certainly worth praising, however, would have to be the animation. This is a fantastic looking series, especially for when it came out. See, something I noticed when working on my Fairly OddParents ranking video was that, for the time, Fairly OddParents looks kinda It's kind of shitty. There's a bunch of charm to it, mainly with the character expressions and posing, don't get me wrong. But it always takes me by surprise when I remember that Fairly OddParents came out in the exact same day as a show like Invader Zim, which looks infinitely better. There's a lot of reasons for that, and let's be real, Invader Zim looking so ahead of its time ends up being one of the contributing factors as to why it got cancelled so soon. I remember reading somewhere that an average episode had a budget of $1.2 million. Whereas looking at the Fairly OddParents...
Well, how do I look?
Yeah, I'm sure it was a fraction of that. But Danny Phantom is not the same story. You can tell a bunch of time and work went into the visual identity of the series, and that effort undoubtedly paid off, as it's by far one of the most unique and eye-catching cartoons Nick has ever produced. It does have that thing where the pilot looks infinitely more dynamic and expressive than anything to come out of the rest of the show. They really loved playing with the camera and having the characters squash and stretch a lot, which ended up being toned down. But that's not to dock the rest of the season because it all looks amazing. Of course, the most obvious point of praise would have to be the colors. And Discord just opened over my script. I love the shade of green they give the ghost stuff. It stands out so much, giving such a cool and otherworldly vibe to places like the Ghost Zone, especially compared to how dull and dreary the Earth locations are. The contrast is amazing, and they really love playing with the colors and lighting during action scenes. Oftentimes a background will prominently feature one desaturated color that will be completely swapped out for another one once the lighting changes. It's a detail that's kind of lost on a lot of newer cartoons, with most opting to change that sort of stuff in the compositing stage. Which still can look extremely good, but there's definitely a charm in looking back to a time when that wasn't as easy to do. With the background designers having the task of figuring out how things need to react to changes in light. But on top of that, the designs are also wonderful. I adore this art style. I oftentimes see people claim that it's pretty much the same as Fairly OddParents, which I, too, on the surface level agree with, but it's become evident through watching it that there are major differences when you have to compare the two. And not just in the backgrounds either, with them being made up of much more abstract shapes, being completely lineless as well, compared to the slightly more structured Fairly OddParents. The character designs, too, are also much more anatomically correct. You know, Timmy Turner would look out of place in the world of Danny Phantom. I mean, just look at the way each show handles a football field, for example. Fairly OddParents back in its Oh Yeah cartoon days, and in a lot of Butch's old concept art, seemed much more inspired by the likes of Hanna-Barbera, which makes sense considering his position at Cartoon Network. But once the series went into production, you could tell it was starting to veer more towards something more akin to UPA. Characters and backgrounds having clear, abstract silhouettes, and of course the thick outlines the show is infamous for. I think Danny Phantom comes off more like an evolution on that, rather than simply the same thing again. While the Fairly OddParents is very flat by design, I think Danny aimed more so to try their hand at giving that art style more depth, with much more three-dimensional camera angles and characters that don't look terrifying when looking at the camera. I really love the way they draw hands too, being much more square and blocky compared to the hands Butch is most often associated with. Despite that already being a thing in other stuff first, but whatever. All this is to say, Butch Hartman should definitely be given all the praise and accolades for producing such a good-looking show. But is there more to his involvement than meets the eye? I've avoided the subject for long enough, but to get out of the way, Butch Hartman is obviously not seen in the same light he was a decade ago for a myriad of reasons. Refusing to pay his channel employees, making fun of the original Timmy Turner's voice actress's death in front of the current Timmy voice actress.
Doing great, and then she ended up passing away. And I think Tara actually had something to do with that, and so that was probably your fault.
Scamming his audience for $300,000 for a project that still hasn't been released 6 years later. That one's pretty bad. There's so much that in a way it almost makes him seem more tame compared to folks who get in trouble for doing one particular big bad thing. Because of that, I also think it's a lot easier for folks to try and add on things to the list of deplorable actions, like I've suddenly started to see racist being dumped onto the end of these descriptions, but nobody can really back it up with actual evidence. I mean, I would just point to this.
We can do anything as long as we're doing it for some idiot human what rubbed our lamb.
But because of all this controversy, I oftentimes see folks try to claim that you can almost discredit Butch's involvement in Danny Phantom in a way. Because if you didn't know, Butch Hartman didn't design this, or almost any of this. That credit would go to one Steven Silver, who has a pretty monumental career, having a hand in working on some of the best cartoons of the 2000s, being a character designer on Fairly OddParents, Kick Buttowski, a lot of Scooby-Doo projects, Norm of the North, but most notably he's known for being the lead character designer on two massive shows, those being Kim Possible and Danny Phantom. And so it was Steven's job to take those ideas and turn them into something, well, good. Now because of all that, is it safe to make the claim that Butch shouldn't be given credit for Danny Phantom, considering many of its most iconic aspects, you know, the designs and characters and even a lot of the writing, wasn't done by him? Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. It's become a lot more common these days for folks to try and distance people they deem as being bad from the media they consume. I guess it's easier to sleep at night knowing you're not, at least in a small way, giving them support. And while I do agree that it's completely necessary to provide proper credit for these people who worked hard on this stuff, as well as calling out bad actors, I think it can go a little overboard. People will read online that Steven was the lead character designer on Danny Phantom, give him all the credit for that, then see that he was also a character designer on Fairly OddParents, and now start spotting in different circles that he's the one who designed all those characters too, when that's just not true. He didn't even join Fairly OddParents until season 2. Animation on a scale like this is a collaborative medium. The solution to ensuring people get proper credit isn't by trying to remove someone's involvement, find a different person to give that credit to, and then proceed to funnel all the praise towards them instead. Pointing out that Steven Silver was the lead designer on Danny Phantom doesn't suddenly mean Butch Hartman is no longer the creator. Same goes with Steve Marmel, one of the show's primary writers. Now, is this to try and discredit Steven's involvement at all? Of course not. Again, his work is fantastic, and I'd highly recommend you check out his book, The Silver Way. I just don't think it should become the norm to try and give folks these roles that don't actually apply to them, just to get away with not giving someone you think is bad the credit. Just seems kind of childish to me and rewriting history. How about instead of acting like they don't exist, you actually talk about it? Have the discussion of liking a piece of media while still being able to acknowledge the bad that the creator has done. Because for some reason, people only apply this backwards logic when it comes to someone they see negatively. Does that mean it should be normalized to claim Steven Silver should get credit over the creators of Kim Possible too? I don't personally think so. How about Steven Hillenburg? Is it fair to say that he shouldn't be credited for SpongeBob just because he had little to no involvement in a majority of the series? What about Matt Groening? He's only written like 4 episodes of The Simpsons. Sorry if it comes off like a strawman argument or like I'm trying to defend the many, many bad things Butch Hartman has done, because, believe me, I'm not. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is the guy was hired by Butch Hartman to do a job he did extremely well. But at the end of the day, there wouldn't be Danny Phantom without Butch, no matter how much you'd like for that to not be the case. Okay, to get back to the actual show, something I really enjoy about Danny Phantom Season 1 is that in the limited amount of episodes they were dealing with, they make an active effort to ensure that Danny has at least one standout episode playing off his dynamic with another member of the cast, even making efforts to slightly change his status quo with them depending on how they interact.
Now that Twink is out of the way, you're coming to my party Saturday, right?
Like I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite episodes from Season 1 would have to be What You Want, which reveals to us that Tucker has been growing gradually more jealous of Danny for his ghost powers, with him using them as a way of showing off and having Tucker fill in for whatever demeaning role he doesn't have time for. This all changes once he meets a ghost genie that gives him the same powers as Danny, progressively increasing his own ego, and his jealousy manifesting and transforming him into a giant Mr. Beast.
Wow! It looks like those high-protein breakfasts are really paying off!
Well, Butch, what are you doing here? I thought you didn't make this show. Or we'll have an episode like Control Freaks, which focuses on Danny and Sam, with her parents wanting her to stop hanging around him, seeing him as a bad influence. I was shocked at how quickly they start establishing the two of them having a thing for each other. They're super blatant about it after a while.
Oh, here. My hands are warm.
Maternal Instinct is a pretty charming romp between Danny and his mum, with her being afraid of him slipping away, obviously not being aware that the distance between them is a result of his ghost powers. My Brother's Keeper focuses on the relationship between Danny and his sister, her also wondering why he's so reclusive and resentful towards her. The penultimate episode of the season is a heartwarming story of Jack having to redeem himself in front of his son, worrying that he's nothing more than an embarrassment. And I could go on. When I say each somewhat main character gets an episode about them, I mean every character. It even extends to the secondary cast, Pauline, Dash, Valerie. They do a super good job here at sprinkling enough of them throughout most of the episodes that when they do focus on them later on, it's like we're getting to see their actual depth, that they're more than just the stereotypes they were initially presented as. Well, okay, except for Dash. And maybe Pauline, we find out it wasn't even really her throughout a majority of the episode. Damn. I think this is a really natural way of expanding this world and working with what little episodes they truly had. That's sort of the issue with having shows with these massive ensembles. You know, if you don't have enough episodes to devote to each character, so they have at least one moment to shine that doesn't just come from little highlights here and there, it can leave the viewer scratching their head and wondering why half of these guys are even here in the first place. But Danny Phantom so far has done a pretty exceptional job at easing me into this world, to the point where I actually do start to care for these guys. It's fun and exciting seeing Danny learn new powers over the course of the season. It's cool seeing his dynamics with these people change the more they interact. And there is nowhere more where that shines true than with the villains. I am shocked at just how many foes they managed to cram in here, almost all of which being memorable in their own way, as well as making frequent reappearances throughout the whole season, to show you that this is going to be more than a simple monster of the week shtick, where a villain shows up, Danny beats them, and then they're gone for good. The villains are such an important part of this series that I think it's only fair to highlight all of them. I'm going to be talking about each of them in order of appearance, because again, a lot of them do come back and play important roles in future episodes. But then there are others, like the aforementioned Lunch Lady Ghost. She's a lunch lady. More often than not, my least favorite villains in Season 1 were like her, where they just exist to serve as a threat to the town. And the worst of Butch Hartman's writing shines through with these characters who just repeat the same gag over and over again. She acts like a sweet old lunch lady, but with an edge. You sure don't want to tick her off. Whatever. Unfortunately, I feel pretty similarly to Episode 2's villain, merely being a ghost dragon and nothing more. It's not a huge deal since it's made a little more interesting through its amulet, only being unleashed once its wearer is filled with enough anger. It's a good showcase of a super in-depth bad guy not being needed as long as the gimmick behind him is unique compared to the others. Skulker is where things really kick off though, him being this cool hunter ghost, who becomes completely enamored with Danny after realizing that he's a half-ghost, half-human hybrid wanting to capture him. His design is great along with a pretty good performance by Matthew St. Patrick, who they understandably could not afford to keep on for the entirety of the show. But it's really neat having a villain whose goal isn't just world domination or escaping the ghost zone. He's an antagonist with his eyes set squarely on Danny, it's cool. Also, do I even count the box ghost? I mean, he's the box ghost, what more is there to say?
Hey! I have feelings too, you know!
Episode 4 sees the introduction of another main stat, Technus. I was super confused watching this because my only time ever seeing this character before was from the Nicktoons Globs of Doom video game where you can play as him. He has a completely different design, also got surgery on his forehead apparently. Spoilers, I guess. Sadly, I don't think his appearance here was all too memorable, even if I like that it further shows the variety of these bad guys. You know, they're not all mindless specters. Some have specific roles they've given themselves. With Technus being a master of science and electrical technology, with the ability to take over machines like computers and shit. Even builds a giant robot suit to fight with, it's neat, but ultimately, I just didn't care for him all that much. I think maybe my impression of the villain usually correlates to how much I liked the episode they were featured in, and Danny Phantom for me had a pretty slow beginning. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what happens in Attack of the Killer Garage Seal if I tried and I watched it a week ago. Dash somehow manages to install a new CPU or something into his computer all by himself. That's what shocked me most. I can't even do that. Sidney Poindexter is the first time that I find myself really liking a villain though. And that's because he's not really a bad guy. I like how it plays on the idea of Amity Park being a little bit haunted even before Danny's dad created the ghost portal, with Danny being given a new locker at school that everyone is afraid of, with it having belonged to a dorky kid from the 1950s. He sees Danny using his ghost powers to fuck with the bullies, naturally mistaking Danny for being the real bully here, and of course, with Sidney being a fucking nerd, he wants to get back at him by switching bodies with Danny, trapping him inside an existential purgatory, forever trapped in high school. That sounds horrid. I guess I like him so much because, similarly to Skulker, it's someone who has a personal problem with Danny, further eating to his growth by the end of the episode, with Danny learning that just because he can use his powers to fuck with someone who did him wrong, doesn't mean he should. I don't think he follows that lesson, but it's the thought that counts. Sidney also says one thing here too that really piqued my interest.
Everybody in the ghost zone talks about you. You're half a boy, half a ghost. The half-a.
I'm not sure if this is meant to tie in with Danny's previous foes like Skulker going back to the Ghost Zone and announcing to everyone about the existence of Danny, but if so, then I think that's an incredibly cool reveal. The idea that everybody in there is aware of his existence, which only creates more suspense on who's gonna come out of there next now that he basically has a giant target on his head. I mentioned the Ghost Genie before, her name is Desiree. She works as a neat one-off villain, also one of the only ghosts here to have a backstory, being promised by a sultan to have all her wishes granted before being ejected from his life by his jealous wife. She died alone and with a shattered heart, forever roaming the world to grant the wishes of whoever desire. Oh, I get it now. That alone makes her cool in my books. She's basically a living monkey's paw. Whoever's wish she grants has to face a personal sacrifice in exchange, like Tucker turning into a ferocious beast. She's neat. Next up, we got Walker, the strict owner of the Ghost Zone prison, locking Danny away after he sneaks in to retrieve a gift his dad got for his mom. As if not, they might get divorced. It's a little dark, okay. His design is one of my favorites, along with his voice. He's the first boss you face off against in the first level of Nicktoons Unite after you explore the Ghost Zone prison itself. Not having context for what this place is and how it looks, pretty damn cool, even if that game is a piece of shit. I never knew how memory cards worked. I'd always take them out of my PS2 not thinking it did anything, and so when I'd have to replay each game from the beginning again, I didn't question it, I just thought that's how it worked. I had the patience of a saint. But because of that, I had to replay this stage literally hundreds of times, and he always scared the shit out of me, but in retrospect that might have been because of the sound design over anything else. After writing that, I just went on a rabbit hole again of watching through all the cutscenes for these games, and maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, but, like, come on, I feel like you can do another one, Nickelodeon. Or a remake, or at least something with these guys. They all work so well off each other. The only franchise here not currently active in some form is Jimmy Neutron. I feel like people would still care and support a return to these fun collabs. Please. My Brother's Keeper introduces us to Penelope Spectra, the school counselor. With a name like that, she's gotta be human. Her and her assistant are both ghosts, who would've thought? Using her authority to put all the kids down, then feeding off their depression to keep her eternally young. I like that idea, even if it kind of feels like it's restricting her to being another one-off. She's one of the only villains to feel like they've maximized all her potential in a single episode, but I know she comes back a couple times later on, so I guess we'll see what they do with her. I'm also not too keen in her design, I don't know what it is. There's just something about it, maybe it's the glasses, I don't think they suit that well. But I do really like how her shadowy ghost form looks, it's fun. Overall, decent bad guy girl. Valerie is probably the most unique villain from Season 1. Unique in that she's not even a ghost. Instead, starting out as just another mean popular girl at Danny's school. During a mishap involving Danny and a ghost dog, her dad loses her job, forcing them to move from their nice house to a shitty apartment. With this, she starts getting ghost hunting equipment delivered to her by a mysterious figure, including a cool red suit and hoverboard. With these newfound tools, she makes it her mission to hunt down and capture Danny Phantom, both of them being completely unaware of their alter egos. Ember McLean is probably the most infamous bad guy from the entire series, and unfortunately it's not because of anything she does in the actual show. I want to touch on all that stuff a little later on, but for now I want to focus on the shit that's actually in the episode. She's this ghostly pop singer who uses her songs to hypnotize people into adoring her. The more eyes on her, the more powerful she becomes. Her blue color scheme really makes her stand out among the greens and blacks that most of these other guys are primarily made up of. Also, one of the rare appearances from Tara Strong, Timmy's voice actress. Funnily enough, I noticed Cosmo and Wanda's voice actors pop up here and there too. Susan Blakesley playing the role of the medieval lady from the Dragon episode, and Darren Norris playing Bullet. I'm skipping a tad, but he's enlisted by Walker to help take over Amity Park, as well as capturing Wolf. With a U. Who was initially sent to find Danny before befriending him. Bullet's design stands out a lot, but I think both these guys are fairly forgettable in my opinion. Not bad, but not going on my top 10s anytime soon. Seam goes with Fright Night, I didn't care for him much either. Although that seems a little more intentional, with him not really playing much of a role in the episode until the second half, where Danny unleashes him by pulling his sword out of its resting place to be a prop in his haunted house. He terrorizes the town for a bit. It's cool that his sword sends people into a dimension of their worst fear. But again, among all these other guys, he just kind of fades from my memory. Honestly, I forgot he was even a character until I started looking up who I was missing. Someone certainly not worth forgetting though is Johnny 13, who first appears in an episode called 13, which, as it turns out, is episode, you guessed it, 14. You were so close.
Excuse me, I think you look perfect, kitten.
What the fuck? I really like him. I'm noticing my favorite rivals here are the ones who lean more into the human spirit aspects rather than going into monster territory. I think it just allows for a much more engaging dynamic between Danny and them. In Johnny's case, he's this cool biker dude who starts trying to get with Jazz, with it being revealed by the end that this was all a ploy so he could use her body as a vessel, to be possessed by his girlfriend, Kitty, allowing her to leave the ghost zone. I love his design, his oversized trench coat, greasy hair, and overall edginess. Wait a second. And lastly, we have Freak Show, who's also one of the only non-ghost bad guys in the bunch. Out of all the actors, I am forever confused as to why they got the guy from 2.5 Men to voice him. He uses this family heirloom to hypnotize the ghosts into doing his bidding, something which also works on Danny, using them to play parts in his traveling goth circus and also rob banks and stuff. You know, I think I'd start to notice a pattern if every bank in the country was robbed right when this creepy dude and his gang of supernatural helpers come to town, but whatever. Look at how long that took, just to list the villains. And only the ones from Season 1, that's insane. And none of this feels bloated either, they all get their time to shine. By the end, creating a massive rogues gallery for Danny, with a plethora of foes who continue to reappear again and again, things only getting more compelling as the season goes on. See, the first 6 or so episodes pretty consistently follow that Monster of the Week formula, and while watching it, despite enjoying it overall, I wasn't too sure where all the hype was coming from. Like, sure, these episodes are entertaining and have a lot of fun concepts, but one of the best Nicktoons? I don't know. That was until episode 7. See, any Danny Phantom fanatic could easily tell that I left one important villain out of that rundown. And that's because I think his introduction marks a shift in the series, the point in which Danny Phantom goes from good to great. Bitter reunion sees the Fenton family get invited to the mansion of Vlad Masters, Jack and Maddie's old friend from college who infamously had his life ruined after a freak accident left him disfigured. But it's all good, now he's a bazillionaire. It's clear he holds a huge resentment towards Jack, blaming him for not only the accident, but also for stealing Maddie from him, being madly in love with her. At night, however, while wandering the manor, Danny meets a mysterious new foe. Who could this possibly be? Let's not even bother with that.
Danny Phantom, right? You know me?
Of course I know you!
As it turns out, the accident that Vlad was involved in on that day wound up giving him ghost powers, meaning Danny isn't the first ghost-human hybrid. That title belongs to the evil Vlad Plasmius, who's been using his abilities over the years to gain advantage over people, resulting in him becoming rich beyond his wildest dreams, all in the hopes of it finally being enough to win the heart of Danny's mother. Weird. He also reveals to Danny that he was the one who sent the ghosts out of Jack's portal at the start of episode 1, which is just an amazing callback. Vlad is the perfect idea for an archenemy, leans into that whole "we're not so different you and I" gimmick. With Vlad using his powers for evil and Danny trying to use his for good, Vlad continuously trying to bring Danny over to the dark side. Their designs represent that brilliantly, Vlad basically having an inverse of Danny's color scheme along with some reds thrown in there. Because he's evil. It really does a fantastic job at establishing how powerful he is. For all intents and purposes, he's a more experienced Danny, a ghost boy man who's had years to grow accustomed to his powers. It gives you anticipation of what's to come once Danny becomes more used to his ghost abilities, like splitting into multiple copies of himself. It also creates this perfect agreement between the two, where neither can reveal each other's secret identity as it risks blowing their cover too. It works incredibly well. This is a great episode and immediately got me excited for what's to come. After Vlad is introduced, we get a lot more minor bits of continuity sprinkled throughout the season, such as having the trio travel inside the ghost zone to try and map things out better. We see Danny attempting to learn the powers that he saw from Vlad. And on top of that, we see the return of a bunch of the best villains from before. Even a lot of the villains I wasn't all that fond of started growing on me here. Technus returns in a much better role, taking over an online MMO that Danny likes to play to upgrade himself. Danny teams up with a bunch of the foes who were imprisoned in the ghost zone in order to escape. Johnny 13 comes back as Pauline finds out about Danny Phantom actually being Danny Phantom. Shocker. Thinking about it though, turning into Danny Phantom kind of changes his whole skin color. That might have been enough. But it turns out that Johnny's girlfriend has merely been possessing Pauline to get back at her ex, with Johnny and Danny having to team up to get her to leave. My favorite thing though would have to be when they start combining the villains, creating these weaving triangles where we get to see all three of them butt heads with each other, none of them truly sharing the same vision. You know, it would be easy for them to just bring two of these villains together and go, perfect, now we can do an episode where they both team up to defeat Danny. But like, that's boring. Fairly Odd Parents did that all the time, and guess what? It sucked. Just because they all want to defeat Danny doesn't necessarily mean they share the same goals and get along over their mutual disdain. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing. Instead, we have episodes like Life Lessons, where Skulker returns again to kidnap Danny, but also Valerie, sticking them in a twisted game where he hunts them both at the same time. They're tied together, which gives them the perfect opportunity to actually talk for once, both learning that the other isn't necessarily as bad as they thought. Valerie might just be my favorite out of the bunch. I think her and Danny have a really fun dynamic, becoming mutuals by the end and agreeing on a truce. By the end of the season, though, things really begin ramping up, as we see Vlad try to once again disparage Jack's name while putting a bounty out for Danny Phantom. This is all a ploy to distract him so that he can use the Fenton ghost portal now that his doesn't work anymore, with him seeking out the skeleton key which can release any prisoner from the ghost zone. Over the course of the season, we see more and more people become aware of Danny's presence in the town, them starting to blame everything on him and seeing him as a threat. It's a pretty monumental moment, honestly, I love it. Kind of pits the entire universe against Danny. Not only is he hated as a normal boy, but also as Danny Phantom in the Ghost Zone and on Earth. Again, Vlad uses this to his advantage. Unluckily for him though, Danny decides to kill two birds with one stone by allowing Jack to capture him to redeem his fallen image, defeating Vlad in the process. This doesn't matter though, as by the end we see him get thrown back into the ghost zone where he manages to find just what he's been looking for, setting up for an action-packed, intense Season 2 where Vlad manages to release all of Danny's once-defeated foes. And then the 2.5-man goth circus episode happens afterwards. I don't think that was meant to be the finale. And that's Season 1 of Danny Phantom. Overall, a really impressive run, especially for the time. Again, I was not feeling it at first. I was getting ready to stand up here and say that Danny Phantom is overrated. But you know what? After the first quarter or so, I really started getting into it. I mean, I had to drag myself to watch those first 6 episodes, but after, I watched the rest of Season 1 in one sitting. I was genuinely enjoying myself. Sure, it suffers from a lot of Butch's writing quirks, particularly how much exposition the characters exposit, having to announce everything they're doing as they're doing it.
With my supersonic bat sonar, I'll be able to find Timmy even though he's invisible.
I can see that! But what it does right, it really does right. Mainly doing a good job at naturally expanding its world and cast of characters, giving each their own moment to shine. I find myself really caring about a lot of these guys, especially the Fenton family and their relationship with Vlad, and it's got me incredibly excited for what's to come in Season 2, aka where shit gets real. I always see folks claim that Danny Phantom got cancelled because of poor ratings, but from what I looked up, Season 1 at least was doing just fine, pretty consistently getting around 3 to 4 million viewers. Dude, it's so surreal to see these cable Nielsen ratings showing the first Jimmy Timmy Power Hour being one of the highest viewed pieces of television that week. Dude, look at this list, Fairly OddParents dominates this shit, that's what I like to see. My assumption here would have to be that Danny Phantom's lack of monumental success would have to come from when it aired. Looking at these release dates really showcases just how slow Nickelodeon were at pumping these out. They aired a bunch pretty consistently at first, but as the season went on, we started seeing months in between episodes, airing super sporadically. They took a break from November to February, then took another break until June to air the last 2 episodes. I understand this was probably a more common practice back then, you know, the internet wasn't as commonly used, so it wasn't as easy to look up the full list of episodes in a season and get a release date for each of them. But I think it's safe to say this hurt the chance of it growing a solid fan base. You know, between the months of February and June, it meant they only had the ability to rerun 1, maybe 2 episodes a week before they had to start recycling the same ones over and over again. And that was by the end of the season. By the time they took their first major break, they only had 9 episodes to re-air. That's not something you can really put on every day. And worst of all, this wasn't a SpongeBob, Fairly OddParents, or even Jimmy Neutron. These weren't 11-minute romps, meaning one episode was basically 2 different stories. You know, 10 episodes of the Fairly OddParents is basically 20 different stories, whereas Danny Phantom is just the 10. Danny Phantom episodes were 22 minutes long, meaning I'm sure for a lot of kids out there, it probably got repetitive to keep rewatching the same handful of stories again and again, wondering when something new was coming. Even worse, by the time Season 1 was coming to an end, Avatar: The Last Airbender would premiere, starting just before Danny Phantom went on that 3-month hiatus before the finale, taking the spotlight as Nick's first truly serialized cartoon and blowing people away. I think Danny just came out at a bad time, paired with Nickelodeon probably not seeing it as much of a priority compared to SpongeBob and the Fairly OddParents, considering it didn't blow up the same way those ones did. But still, no matter all that, Butch and his team continued with the 40 episodes they were contracted to make, with Danny Phantom Season 2 premiering 1 week after Season 1 ended. I have to question your logic here, Nick. Why not let Season 1 finish airing in a timely manner before starting the next? Or maybe they only did that to try and stretch Season 1 out as much as possible so it could directly lead into Season 2 the week after? Or maybe... look, I'm trying to see inside the mind of a group of Nickelodeon executives from 2005. I'm playing a losing game. Let's just move on. Okay, before we continue, I have to quickly address a disgusting mistake that's been prevalent throughout the video so far. Her name is Paulina. I kept calling her Pauline. You can delete your comment now. Or don't, hey, it's engagement. You know what, actually, please make another comment about it. Season 2 of Danny Phantom starts by retreading unfamiliar territory, showcasing a quick reintroduction for how Danny got his powers, this time adding the detail that it was Sam who wanted him to go inside the Fenton ghost portal, resulting in that flash where everything just changed. His molecules got all rearranged. First thing that stuck out to me here would have to be the slight shift in art style. Looking a lot more refined and making an effort to present the characters as being a tad older, having slightly more realistic proportions with smaller heads and eyes. Will say, I think I prefer how it looked before, but at the same time I appreciate their effort in trying to visually convey that Danny and friends are getting older and maturing. After he and Sam start getting in more and more frequent arguments with him blaming her for a lot of the recent ghostly activity, which is her fault, her wish that she and Danny had never met gets granted by Desiree. But wait a second, they just established that Sam was the one to get Danny his ghost powers. You don't possibly think that not only does Tucker and he not remember anything about their history together, but Danny also can't protect the Time from the ghosts, thanks Sam. Her having to recreate how he got his powers and catching him up to speed with his abilities. Again, it's a mere retread, but I actually think this concept works incredibly well at premiering the new season, as it allows us to compare how Danny is now against the start of the series, showcasing that there is a pretty major difference, of course with him being much more confident using his abilities. I also love how blatant they were about wanting an excuse to put Danny's D logo on his costume permanently. We see Sam designing it early on, and so when they're recreating the ghost portal explosion that gave Danny his powers, she simply just slaps the cool symbol on, which attaches itself to his suit somehow. I was surprised they even bothered going back and superimposing it over the whole theme song. That was cool. I'm not sure why this was something not given to Danny from the get-go. Maybe they didn't come up with it until a bit later into production, or perhaps Butch simply wanted a scenario in which Danny had to earn it. But either way, it's a fun change to represent his newfound status as the town hero. Again, they're not hiding how much they want to just keep it there no matter what. At the end of the episode, when Sam realizes that to put everything back together, all she has to do is once again make a wish for it, we see her call out for everything to go back to the way it was, but Danny also gets to keep his new logo, just because she likes it. It's pretty funny. Overall, this was a much better premiere compared to Season 1. Something I was really curious about here was whether or not we were going to see them make an effort to introduce just as many new foes for Danny to face, or if they would insist on instead simply reusing the bad guys that they had already spent their time establishing. And after finishing the season, it's pretty evident that they ended up falling on the latter. That's not to say there's no new faces, however, just a lot less to go over. This is not going to take anywhere near as long as last time. First up, we're introduced to Youngblood in episode 3. At first I thought he was a pirate ghost or something, but his reappearance in the Fenton Menace showcases that the gimmick with him is that he's just a kid playing pretend, adopting different personas with his talking skeleton bird lackey. Again, at first he's a pirate, teaming up with Ember McLean of all characters. I mean, who knows who this could possibly be?
Ember's Back Cruise Lines? Weird.
Really?
Ember's back. Ember's back. That's not a clue, that's a billboard.
Whereas his next major appearance says I'm taking on the role of a cowboy. I like him a lot despite my usual disdain for bratty kid characters. He works as a villain, and I think what ends up elevating Youngblood is the fact that they did indeed get a kid to play him, being voiced by... Wait, Taylor Lautner? What?
Yup, and they will. All the way to the bottom of that ravine.
Other than a couple other major enemies we're introduced to that I want to delve more into later because I think they deserve more than a quick highlight, there's also Ghost Rider. I feel like their process for creating this guy was pun first, character later. I actually really like this episode despite having the potential to be really cringy and horrible. With Danny being a massive Grinch on Christmas, he lets off some steam in the Ghost Zone, before ruining the Christmas book the Ghost Rider has just finished, and so as revenge he decides to transport Danny inside his own Christmas story, pitting everyone in town against him and requiring everybody speak in rhyme. Again, that sounds like it could be incredibly annoying, but it just might have been one of my favorite episodes. It was super fun and creative. I also like the new Ghost Zone lore that it's required by law for every ghost to call a truce on Christmas, everyone going to kick the shit out of Ghost Rider for fucking with Danny in the holidays. Better yet, he's voiced by Will Arnett of all people. The celebrity cameos in this show was insane.
You're about to get burned. This story's not done till the lesson is learned.
We meet the older brother of the medieval lady from season 1 too, Wanda now fully taking over her voice role, with her returning to Amity Park under a disguise, getting all the girls to compete in a beauty pageant, the winner being forcefully married to him. Gross. There's also Hotep Ra? I don't know. One of the most forgettable bad guys in the entire show. Maybe the most forgettable bad guy. I like the box ghost more than him. He's a ghostly mummy who served as a servant in his life, tricking Tucker into becoming an all-powerful pharaoh with the intent of eventually dethroning him. I just kinda hated this episode in general, which I'll get more into later, and so I forgot this guy even existed. And then there's... Wait, no, that's it. Again, there's much less new rivals introduced here, which in some ways I can see being disappointed with. Again, this show started as very Monster of the Week, and so only bringing in a small handful of new villains over 20 episodes? That seemed lame. But for me, though, I like the decision. At this point, especially, we have plenty. I would rather them try to expand on the best of last season, or even try to improve upon some that I actively didn't like there, either through upgrades or team-ups, or just having a different goal altogether now. For example, we see the return of Penelope Spectra in the second episode. This time, her and her assistant have taken over an abandoned hospital, invading the kids with ghost bugs, so that they have to come to her for help, in which she can harvest their DNA to help create her new form. Which I admit does have a slightly better design. Even if I'd say I'm still not a huge fan of it, the red hair now sticks out a lot compared to the super saturated green used. Technus also gets a new design here, the one I was talking about seeing in Globs of Doom. Thankfully, I think he becomes a lot cooler of an antagonist in Season 2. Skulker, though, returns a bunch throughout the season. You get the idea that he's without a doubt their favorite. There are plenty of episodes here where he is yet again the sole antagonist without much variety. The shakeups instead coming from the scenario Danny is put in when facing him, like accidentally shrinking the two of them along with Dash, and so now he has to struggle to find a way to not only defeat Skulker, but also find a way to turn himself back to normal quick enough before his ghost powers rapidly deplete, revealing his secret identity. For the most part though, a lot of these wind up being my least favorite episodes from Season 2, but they're still really good. Yeah, to get it out of the way now, I think Danny Phantom Season 2 is fantastic, a major step up from an already good first. And I think that mostly comes from not the villains or Danny's relationships like last time, but instead because it's just so much fun. If Season 1 was focused on setting up these characters and how they work off each other, then Season 2's focus is on expanding upon all that and trying to see what mileage they can get out of delving more into that stuff. Like Danny and Valerie's relationship, for example, her admitting to Sam that if she likes Danny, then she needs to do something about it, because if not, she's gonna start pursuing him for herself. This is shown over the course of multiple episodes, culminating when they actually start going out with each other after Technus makes it his plan to distract them by manipulating everything he can to ensure they wind up together. Where by the end she predictably breaks up with him out of fear of Danny getting hurt by her enemies, deciding to go all in on ghost hunting. This is then further used to start up a different idea when Sam gets so annoyed at Danny's continued pursuing of Valerie that she starts now falling for a new exchange student in school, assumably moving on from him. Which predictably then causes Danny to get jealous and have to start seriously considering his feelings for Sam, spying on them and getting saddened once he sees them start to bond more and more. They have so many concepts here that I know as a kid, I would have adored. I know that because I adore them as a 22-year-old too. At times, it borders on fan fiction, a plethora of what-if scenarios that run the risk of being too strange. But considering the show's comic book influence, I think a lot of these only make sense, and offer a ton of alternate looks at Danny's life and the people around him. You really get the idea that they were writing each of these episodes with the thought of how fucking rad the commercial would be. Any kid out there just needing to tune in to see what happens, considering how often they decide to shake up the formula. For example, the episode that sees the return of Technus has a really cool idea that elevates his return, where after getting sick of having to try and balance out his ghost and human life, Danny instead decides to use one of his parents' devices to split him into two, one having all the ghost powers and adopting his role as the town superhero, and the other being stripped of his abilities and becoming a lot more lax because of that. You immediately know where it's gonna go just from hearing that rundown. He's gonna realize that both sides to his life are important and that he would never trade one for the other, having to come together again to try and fuse back together. But who cares, it's exciting. They're plots we've seen time and time again, but handled in a new ghostly way that only Danny Phantom can. How about a scenario in which Vlad's ecto-acne returns, being the illness he got way back when, after being first exposed to the ghost energy back in college? He needs Danny's help to find the cure, and so poisons Sam and Tucker, so now that if he doesn't find it, his best friends are gonna die. The clock is ticking as Danny finds the easiest solution is to go back in time to right before the accident occurred, so he can prevent it altogether. What he doesn't know, however, is that he's unintentionally caused a future in which Jack gets evil ghost powers, with Maddie marrying Vlad instead. Of course, he fixes everything and everything resets, but I love this episode. Time travel is such an entertaining plot device to me. Again, these are basically a bunch of what-ifs, but each of them are used to explore a different aspect of these guys, like Vlad having completely given up on ghosts now that he has Maddie. Whereas it's clearly her passion, her and Jack getting back together even in a world where he looks like this, again, fan fiction. And that's not even mentioning the gender-bent Danny Phantom clone. Yeah. Danielle Fenton is introduced to us as nothing more than Danny's cousin he's never heard of before. She just shows up.
I'm Danielle. Your third cousin once removed? I ran away from home. Hey, you got any food?
It's revealed to us over time that she also has ghost powers, with this cool alternate take on Danny's design that I like a lot. Especially the baggy pants, you can tell Steven had a hand in that. That's not the end of it, however. As it turns out, Danielle isn't Danny's cousin, who could have guessed? Instead, she's a clone of Danny created by Vlad, as his plan is to have an evil Danny clone as his son. Him using Danielle to try and trick the real Danny into a trap so he can harvest more of his DNA. Of course, this leads to Danielle feeling insecure and angry that Vlad will dispose of her once he gets what he needs, causing her to betray him and help Danny escape, leaving to go do something, I don't know. She's also voiced by Violet from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That was neat. I think what I adore so much about these, again, ideas that in most other shows could run the risk of appearing as cliche, is that they're clearly just having so much fun with them. You get the feeling that they wanted to make sure the series never became complacent with where it was at, straying almost completely away from the Monster of the Week shtick they started with. I think that's when I find myself checking out a majority of the time, when an episode would come along and feel like it's doing nothing to show us a new side to these characters or their world. Again, I really hated episodes like King Tuck and the Fenton Menace. King Tuck is just your average power trip episode, with Tucker using his mummy servant to become a pharaoh just like his supposed ancestors until learning that he doesn't want to be a leader. And the Fenton Menace sucks too, featuring Danny starting to see an invisible ghost nobody else notices, with Jazz continually trying to help him keep ghosts off his mind and everyone else thinking he's going crazy. Obviously, we know there actually is a ghost. I don't know why there being one is such an outlandish concept to the people in this town, and especially to Danny's parents. But whatever. Again, the worst of Season 2 is just unremarkable, and I think that in and of itself is pretty remarkable. And this isn't even the height of it, no way. Some of these episodes cover some pretty big moments, sure, but that's to completely ignore the not one, not two, but 3 45-minute specials that are scattered throughout the season, where you can tell they gave it their all to make sure they were as epic and impactful as possible, with a couple even shaking up the status quo in a way that opens up a plethora of new storytelling potential for the preceding episodes. For example, the second special, The Ultimate Enemy, ends with Danny becoming aware that Jazz knows of his powers, them having a short but sweet talk about it. From here they have the opportunity to revolve episodes around that, like having Jazz try to aid Danny in missions and be a general nuisance. Her having to learn that just because they're on the same page now about his powers doesn't necessarily mean she needs to step on his toes with the heroing. Our first special, Rainstorm, continues where last season ended. Almost ended. Vlad is using the skeleton key to acquire the Ring of Rage and Crown of Fire, but upon doing so, he accidentally unleashes the wrath of Pariah Dark, this hulking giant who wants to take over not only the Ghost Zone, but also Earth, causing every ghost PNG imaginable to flee and start rampaging through the streets trying to hide in Danny's town. From here, Danny and his family have to team up with not only all the other ghosts in the Ghost Zone, but also Vlad, to attempt to take down the King of all Ghosts. They also spend a large portion focusing on Danny and Valerie's relationship here too. This is where she starts to outwardly express her feelings for him, which starts to concern Tucker and Sam, as she's also unknowingly trying to kill him.
That's gotta be the ring the Fright Knight's looking for. Vlad must have given it to her. Isn't he a little old for her?
Gross. The stakes have never been higher. Danny having to equip himself with a Fenton battlesuit and make his way to the Ghost Zone for the ultimate showdown. They really flex their budget here, maybe a little too much, we'll get on that later. Also by the end, after Danny saves the day, the town now turns around on him, no longer wanting to see him dead. This is also the first time he announces to them that his name is Danny Phantom. It's a monumental episode. The second special, though, was undoubtedly my favorite. I'm finally at the part that enamored me so much as a kid.
And it was all your fault!
Actually, that was me.
This is where Danny Phantom peaks, in my opinion. To put it in Fairly OddParents terms, the ultimate enemy is this show's channel chasers. I mean, look, open on the future of our town where we see an older version of the main character's friend trying to protect them from an unnamed evil. A buff future version of the main character appears, have possibly the biggest moment in the series' history only to have everything reset by the will of the protagonist. Check, check, and check. That's not a detriment again, I love this episode. Didn't need to know that the lunch lady and Box Ghost fucked in the future though.
I am Box Lunch, daughter of the Box Ghost and the Lunch Lady!
Ew.
We're introduced to a new ghost here too, Clockwork, the Master of Time. He's tasked with preventing this terrible future, and how's he gonna do that? By killing Danny Phantom. It's just Sonic 06. Clockwork is great. In the Ghost Zone, there's no sense of time, so he's simultaneously everywhere all at once. Or every when? To him, this is nothing but a job. There's no emotion in what he has to do, with the knowledge that eventually Danny will turn evil and cause the death of his family and friends. It's incredibly dark and I adore that about it. It manages to imply some really fucked up shit without coming off as needlessly edgy or anything. We learn that after an explosion that killed his family and friends, Danny had nowhere else to go but Vlad, being so overcome with grief that he begs Vlad to get rid of his human emotions, to make him a full ghost. Upon doing this, Ghost Danny proceeds to then go and rip out Vlad's ghost self too, overshadowing its body and turning into this creepy fusion of Danny and Vlad. A great detail that's excellently foreshadowed through his design, obviously being a combination of the two. With that, we learn that not only did Danny then go and try to take over the world, but that he also straight up killed human Danny after this split. That's so fucking dark and rad. With Danny trying his best to prevent this future from happening, we see evil Danny trap him in the destroyed Amity Park, as he goes back in time to assume his place. wanting to ensure everything plays out how it should. I like that this in and of itself creates a little paradox. It was pretty unbelievable to me that Danny would do something like this, become a literal killer after cheating on his school exams. But I like that you can almost bypass this in a way, by assuming that this only happens because evil Danny goes back in time to do this. Although that puts into question how it all started, what was the original timeline that caused evil Danny in the first place, whether or not these alternate timelines then branch off, or whatever, it's fun, who cares? This is an insanely fantastic episode. Definitely my favorite out of the whole lot. And it's perfect that this would be a prime moment for Danny to learn a new power, the Ghostly Wheel, which is the catalyst for him finally being able to defeat evil Danny. He's grown way stronger than anyone was expecting ever having faced such an enormous threat, and it all comes together perfectly, as Danny returns to the past to save everyone, revealing to them in the process that he is indeed a ghost. It's pretty special, even if, again, everything does reset. I sadly don't have as high a praise for the finale, yet another 45-minute special, Reality Trip. I don't think it's bad, and if anything, I think it has a bunch of cool ideas, but it should have been longer.
Yeah? How about now?
Yeah, still hot.
There was clearly so much more potential here that wasn't fully realized. If anything, this could have been the Danny Phantom movie, an hour-and-a-half long special. But instead we have an incredibly drawn-out beginning, pretty sweet ending, but a middle that feels as if it needed another 20 minutes, completely undercooked. If you know, you know. You know that phrase, it's about the journey, not the destination? Well, yeah, Reality Trip didn't get that memo. Freak Show is back, yet again being the antagonist of another season finale. This time he's taken in by the Guys in White, a group of government agents who special in ghost hunting. They showed up in a past episode, hunting down Danny. I don't know why this is such a popular trope in cartoons. Again, both Danny Phantom and the Fairly OddParents have a pair of these guys. Freak Show steals the Infinity Gauntlet from them. They don't even attempt to hide the shamelessness, honestly, I respect it. I guess Butch didn't know this was going to become an icon in modern pop culture. All he needs to do is find the combination for the 3 gems to go along with it, and all of reality will finally be in his grasp. I mean, it's only 3 gems, how many possible combinations could there be? Not enough for Danny, Sam, and Tucker to not activate it accidentally. You're telling me you couldn't have tried pressing them in order? During this battle, though, Danny winds up transforming back into Danny Fenton. Uh-oh.
Paulina Fenton. Hey, I finally wrapped my mind around it.
Oh wow, that's actually a fun callback.
Seriously, you need to wrap your mind around the idea of Paulina Fenton.
With the trio transporting all 3 gems to secret locations, Freak Show kidnaps all their parents and gives them only 3 days to return them if they ever want to see them alive again. And so they're off on a road trip to gather all the Chaos Emeralds. This road trip amounts to nothing. They go to a location, have a short set piece, the guys in white show up a couple times, and that's it. There's not enough time here to spend on the characters themselves, and especially how Danny reacts to the world being let known of his ghost powers. It's only ever used in passing to create more obstacles for them, but I wish we actually got to see how this affects Danny, at least in one scene, how he feels about his secret being out. Also, we learn here that his parents are literally nothing but supportive of his ghost powers when they find it out, which means there's literally no reason for Danny to keep it a secret from them from now on, even if it does lead to a sweet moment between them.
We love you, sweetie. You.
Whether you're ghost, boy, or something in between.
Never mind though, everything is reset again. Don't get me wrong, Reality Trip is good and a fine end to a season, but it's just hard not to see an amazing special buried beneath it, leaving me wishing Nickelodeon had given them an opportunity to fully realize it. And that's the end of Danny Phantom Season 2. Now Danny is beloved worldwide and the government is off his back, leading to a Season 3 that... I don't know, I don't think they thought that far ahead. Again, Nickelodeon's first order for the series was of 40 episodes, and so I imagine they wrote Reality Trip with keeping in mind that it could have been the end of the series, leaving things open-ended while still concluding on a positive note with no cliffhanger. And if that happened and Danny Phantom did indeed end here, I think it would have made a pretty good finale. Again, there were better episodes in Season 2, but I don't think any would have worked as well as this one does. Gives the trio their mandatory cartoon road trip movie, each of them get their own moment to shine in some way, along with Danny getting some closure with his parents and redeeming his name among the townsfolk, before resetting it all. If this was the finale, then I really think Danny Phantom would have gone down as one of the most wanted cartoons for a revival series. It already is, but with the more mixed reception to Season 3 and it actually having a proper finale to conclude the series, I think you're more likely to find folks satisfied with the fact that it did indeed end before further burying its name into the ground like Butch's other series. I'm not really sure why Nickelodeon ordered a batch in other episodes, especially with such a low number just being 13 more. You know, it's the shortest season by a wide margin. But they probably just wanted to give it one final shot. Butch is a sweet talker. And he had an incredibly strong relationship with Nickelodeon, especially at that time. So maybe he just said the right words and that was that. Getting into that later. If I were to guess, the decision to renew Danny Phantom for a third season most likely happened around when season 1 was airing, as it meant Nick didn't have the clearest idea of whether or not it would eventually become a hit the more they aired it. It's a pretty common tactic for studios to renew shows, sometimes before they even started airing as a way to further drum up hype. Like, wow, this show must be so good if they're this confident in it. I'm not too sure how the ratings for season 2 were, but if there's one thing I can definitely point to that would have contributed to Nick's view of it as a failure, it would have to be the lack of merchandise. I mean, just by watching the show, it becomes fairly obvious there was a bunch of opportunities for cool toys to make. The Fenton Thermos, the Ghost Assault Vehicle, make a crappy kid's costume out of Danny's design even. That's not even to mention all the different costumes we see Danny wear throughout the show. There are dozens of variants right here. How about the peeler suit? That would be rad. Or even all the ghosts, there are dozens of these guys. As far as I'm aware, there's only really one Danny Phantom figure out there, and not only was it released in 2012, well after the show was cancelled, more so being made for Nicktoons nostalgia than anything else, but also, it looks like shit. On top of all that, Danny Phantom severely needed some video games. SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, and Jimmy Neutron can get a bajillion games, but not Danny Phantom. Fucking El Tigre can get a PS2 game, but not Danny. He only ever really appeared in the crossover releases where they could bank on the popularity of SpongeBob at least. But it's bizarre to me that the only series here that was actually focused on action didn't get a video game. Wait, what? He did? What the fuck? Why didn't I know about this? Oh, that's why. They were all designated to handheld systems. So not only did Danny Phantom get a game, but he got 2. And not only did he get 2, but 3. Kinda. I didn't grow up with a Game Boy Advance, and on my DS I was playing New Super Mario Bros. 99% of the time, and so these went right over my head, not that I would have played them anyways. Again, I didn't really care about this show when it was airing. But I suppose it might be worth it to see how the show handled itself with the only real merchandise it received at the time. Do video games count as merchandise? Not really, okay. The only real piece of cross-promotion the series had. Danny Phantom the Ultimate Enemy is the perfect special to make a game out of, even if I think Reality Trip might have been a bit more suited with it focusing on them collecting a series of MacGuffins, but whatever, I'll take Dark Danny over Freak Show any day of the week. Still though, only on the Game Boy Advance? I mean, this came out in 2005, the prime time for your game to get a port on every console known to man. It wasn't uncommon for a licensed game to come out in the GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation, GBA, and DS. Throw a PSP port in there too. Oh yeah, no wait, that's another thing. This was 2005. The DS was already a year old. Selling it exclusively on a handheld that was already on its way out doesn't seem like the smartest decision if you want to hype people up on your new series that's already struggling. It took Nick a while to get the memo. They released Attack of the Toybots on the GBA in 2007. For reference, the Xbox 360 was already 2 years old by this point. You might as well release it on a fucking toaster. Anyways, the Ultimate Enemy actually is a pretty cool opening for what it is, even if Danny's ghostly whale is looking a little goofy. I was shocked to see that it actually followed the story of the special pretty one-to-one. You're not gonna get a SpongeBob movie situation here.
I can take you there.
Who are you?
I'm not a lifeguard, but I play one on TV.
The visuals and sprites look good for what they are, and it's a cool idea to open by letting you play as evil Danny, even if this is quite literally the only time in the entire game where you get to. Yeah, this thing isn't very long. I got through it in an hour, even after spending 10 minutes getting stuck in one of the first levels because I was using a keyboard and didn't know where the buttons were meant to. I could have just checked, but then I'd have to click out of the game and go to the emulator settings and... oh shit, I mean my GBA! This is a simple side-scrolling beat-em-up. Danny starts with a basic 3-hit combo and the ability to fly, another move that took me way too long to figure out I had. It's pretty mindless. There were a lot of times where I stopped registering that he was even playing something, just running forward and spamming the attack button until something happened that confused me. What the fuck happened there? You have the ability to turn back into Danny Phantom, or you can walk and jump, I guess. But he's incredibly useless. The only reason you want to do so is to recharge your ghost power meter. But you're not going to see any footage of that because it was just as easy to continue spamming the attack button and not use any of the abilities you can use it for. Like, turning intangible. Didn't need that. There's a couple of weapons you can pick up that make things a little easier. There's some buffs to your speed and attack as well. But you'll never need it. This game is simple. The bosses are pathetic. You're given this rush move later on that just demolishes enemies and rules at closing distance. Before you know it, you're finished. When you defeat Dark Danny by the end, he cries out how you were only able to beat him because of the ghostly wheel attack that you learned, but I didn't even know I unlocked it. Again, I was just spamming punch till the end. It seems to have worked out for me. Honestly, I was anticipating having more to say here. It's cool getting to visit locations from the show like Danny's school or Clockwork's lair, but that's about it. This game probably would have satisfied me as a kid, but that's it. That wasn't Danny's only outing on the Game Boy Advance, though. Although it really should have been. Urban Jungle released in 2006 when the system was even more relevant. I don't know what the thought process here was, especially since it also got a release on the Nintendo DS, which was blowing up in popularity. Now, Urban Jungle is based off a Season 3 episode, an episode which I just assumed had to have been a special, but no, it's just a normal 25-minute romp, alright. It's not like I got spoiled or anything, though. The cutscene text moved so slowly that after a while I just started skipping it. I don't give a shit. I will say, though, the presentation has seen a massive step up. I love the more simplified, stylized sprites shown here. All I can gather is a giant ghost plant thing has taken over the town, plant life overgrowing everywhere. Also, he's kidnapped Sam because... vegetarian, I guess. And yeah, I set it to hard mode, by the way, because I'm cool. Instead of a beat-em-up, Urban Jungle is more of a shoot-em-up. Danny is constantly flying through the stages as you either send out single blasts to the many enemies you face along the way, or hold in the attack button to charge it. Oh my god, I just remembered I could do that. No wonder I struggled so much. Oh yeah, also, because I set it to hard mode. That might have been a mistake. Honestly, where's the Mega Man Danny Phantom clone? That would make a ton of sense. More of a run and gun type of thing. Every boss you defeat giving you a new ghost ability. That would be cool. During stages, enemies will constantly shoot out these blue and red orbs, both of which correspond to Danny's aura around him, with you having the ability to switch auras using the shoulder button. If you do this on a matching color, then it starts to fill up Danny's ghost power meter, with you being able to select 3 of when entering a stage. The further you get in the game, the more powers you unlock. These range from the usual intangibility to new ice powers, I guess he gets that at some point, to a boomerang. The game is pretty involved, honestly. The screen is so tiny, so there's stuff shooting at you constantly from everywhere. With very little time to anticipate it, I find it to be a pretty hard challenge. Again, I should have put it on normal, I'm really regretting that. It's very arcadey, with bonus stages and the likes that are just gauntlets. Survive till the end for points, and if you die, then that's fine, the game just keeps progressing. All as you make your way to each boss fight, like the Lunch Lady, the Box Ghost, Plant Girl Sam, or this guy, who I'm sure I'll learn the name of when I actually get to the episode he stars in. This guy was a fucking nightmare. This took me like 10 minutes. You can find these upgrades in the stages that will change the properties of your regular blast move, and I thought I was lucky to land on this homing blast right as I entered the boss fight. You have to attack both his hands and head, each having their own health bar, so I thought this would be perfect. But the damage it does and the rate at which they fire was so slow. I would occasionally get in a groove and find an area that wasn't receiving any of the guy's attacks, but then I'd be sitting there spamming the same move for minutes on end and it just got tedious. By the time I had one arm left to attack, I died and got booted back to the beginning of the stage. Again, this is my fault for playing with the keyboard, you know, look at the Game Boy versus this. It was a lot harder for me to remember which key did what, and I kept confusing the thing that changed my aura with the thing that switched out my special moves. Then I kept wasting my intangibility power when I meant to do something else. You know, I had to use the same 2 fingers for everything, whereas on the GBA I could at least rest my 3 fingers on the shoulder buttons for quick and easy access. And I know what you're thinking. Couldn't you just walk over to where you have a controller laying around, plug it into your computer, and map out the buttons so it's easier to play? Well, I guess you're right, I could, but alas, I just turned the game off. Sorry, I don't make the rules, just enforce them. Time to move on. Overall, though, I would rather play this over the first. At least it actually was a challenge. I imagine playing this with a controller would actually be a lot of fun. It's pretty involved. So if you for some reason just have to play a Danny Phantom game, then play the DS version of Urban Jungle. Yeah, I was gonna give the DS version its own segment, but there's no point for reasons I'm gonna get into. First off, I want to say I really love this opening title screen. The music is pretty good, and we get this cool shot of the Fenton's house in 3D. And that's really the only major difference. Same style, same story, same exact dialogue. It's the same game. I noticed a couple enemies had slightly different attack patterns like the Lunch Lady Ghost, but for the most part, it's the same thing, just with 3D backgrounds. The only difference I noticed in the gameplay department was their pathetic use of the bottom DS screen. See, usually when you get a power-up or item in the GBA version, you just get it then and there. But here you have to manually select it for it to take effect. It's dumb, and I can see how this can really disrupt you in gameplay, but honestly, it makes it slightly better in my opinion. Now when you have full health and pick up a heart, it isn't just wasted. You can keep it until you actually need it. And if you could do this in the GBA version, I wasn't aware, but now when you get a different blast attack, you can switch between them on the bottom screen too. Fantastic. Urban Jungle is actually a decent time, I'd recommend it, even if I think Danny Phantom could have had a way cooler time in the gaming sphere. And with that, all we're left for with Danny Phantom is the 3rd season. Wow, what a journey it's been so far. I really do have high hopes for this ending. Not. Again, when going in, all I knew about Danny Phantom was that everyone consistently agreed the final season was trash, so I don't have my hopes up. Well, okay, that's not the only thing I knew about Danny Phantom. Unfortunately, I think the most well-known piece of Danny history is related to an event that barely even relates to the show itself. Of course, I'm talking about Randy Stair, a 24-year-old man who in 2017 shut up a store in his hometown in Pennsylvania, all in the name of Ember's Ghost Squad. I understand that this is a massive tonal shift, but again, unfortunately, this is possibly the thing most people remember the show for. Hell, I honestly think there's more people out there who know about this event than people who've actually seen the show, and so I felt I may as well quickly run through it. If you want a more in-depth discussion, then thankfully this has become one of the most regurgitated stories on the internet. Countless videos just sort of running through the same events in the same order, because what else is there to say? And so, I'm just gonna give a rundown. Randy was a big fan of Danny Phantom. He would have been 12 years old when it first aired, meaning he was in its primary demographic. And one of the characters he found himself falling in love with most was Ember, the ghost rock singer, which is chillingly fitting considering her scheme in that introductory episode. He expressed this obsession through YouTube videos dedicated to her, with a lot of comedic skits thrown in there too.
You'll always remember this as the day that you almost found Ember's song in true quality.
No! This led to him beginning to create his own OCs in the patented Butch Hartman style, creating an entire community of Ember-like ghosts, even giving himself a female self-insert to join them. With that, he named the group Ember's Ghost Squad. He grew a fascination with the Columbine shootings around this time, and it seems as if the obsessions have kinda intertwined from there. And through a string of insecurities and a general feeling of not wanting to live on Earth anymore, Randy made a plan to go to the store his father managed and he himself worked at, and killed 3 of the employees working there before proceeding to then take his own life in the hopes of joining Ember in the afterlife. Something worth noting is that while in the store, Randy attempted to shoot a group of propane tanks, intending for them to blow up and burn down the whole store. I mention this because it oddly parallels a potentially canon backstory for Ember in the show, where it recounts her being an unpopular high school girl who wanted to be a rock star. One day while sleeping, her house burned down in flames, her getting caught in the fire. Her Remember song being in reference to this event as well as it giving her a flame in her head. Who knows if this is real, you know, it's not in the show at all and there's no citation for it on the Danny Phantom wiki, but at the same time I think that's kind of irrelevant. Whether or not it was real doesn't mean there's no way that Randy didn't see this and presume it to be the case. We'll never know. Either way, that's pretty much it. I just felt like if I didn't mention it, then a bunch of people would bring it up in the comments. From here, Danny Phantom was going through a major shift, particularly when it comes to the writing side of things. Some of the most long-standing writers wind up leaving the show during this season, having little to no involvement. The main one everybody cites is Steve Marmel, a veteran television writer who worked on Family Guy, Fairly OddParents, and created Sunny with a Chance. What the fuck? He played a major role in the first 2 seasons. Hell, he wrote a majority of the episodes in season 2, including all 3 specials, whereas for season 3, he's only credited as having come up with a story for the pilot. It's rumored the reason for him leaving was creative differences with who else but Butch Hartman. Marmel had been wanting to take the series in a darker direction for season 3, whereas Butch didn't. Again, being the people-pleaser he is, I think Butch would have rather sacrificed the rising dark tone the series had been building in favor of making it more marketable and popular with kids. I think Butch was worried the series would be cancelled, a fear that wound up being true, and so I think he was doing anything he could to finally make it the success he so wanted it to be. And so Marmel left along with many other staff members from Danny and Fairly OddParents to go work on the new Disney show Yin Yang Yo, which would go on to be also incredibly short-lived. Again though, he created Sunny with a Chance he bounced. After seeing all that, it really didn't give me much hope for season 3, with fan reception to it being seriously mixed. And after watching it, yeah, that's the perfect description. I went in expecting a train wreck, and I came out just kind of disappointed. It simultaneously wasn't as bad as I thought, but also just as bad as I thought. The premiere, really having nowhere to go from last season, attempts to then start up a new recurring storyline, as Danny and Vlad's continued pranks on each other leads to Vlad wanting to pull the biggest one of all, by running for mayor of Amity Park and using mind control to have everyone vote for him. Damn. Danny tries his best to prevent this, but it doesn't matter. Things don't reset by the end, and now Vlad is the mayor of Danny's town. It's strange, I think if the series had already started off with Vlad being Danny's mayor, I wouldn't have cared. And while I do think this is a natural progression of the relationship, you know, now the show's main antagonist isn't literally in a different state to the protagonist, but I also kinda liked that. Compared to other cartoons at the time that would have their main villain and use them time and time again for most conflicts, Danny was unique in that Vlad really didn't appear that much. I think Skulker appeared more. Again, it took until almost halfway through season 1 for him to even be introduced, but here, it's all the goddamn time. I went through every episode, and it might be surprising to consider, but Vlad only played a substantial role in 9 episodes of Danny Phantom over the course of the first 2 seasons. That's insane considering how much of a fan favorite he was, also considering he is Danny Phantom's biggest bad guy. But I always thought it was smart how they refrained from overusing Vlad as an antagonist. Wanna know how many episodes he's in just in season 3? 5. Okay, wait, it isn't that much. I guess what makes him feel overused is the pacing of it. The season starts very Vlad heavy, him playing a major role in 3 of the 4 episodes, before disappearing only to come back for the final 2, one of which being the hour-long finale. The season was almost cut in half compared to the others, having a mere 13 episodes, whereas the others had 20. So them having Vlad here just as often as season 2, but with way less episodes in total, results in Vlad feeling overused. He starts losing his impact once you see he's just another resident in Danny's town, down the street. I can see the idea here, again putting him in control of Danny's whole life basically, having eyes all over town, but they just went too far. I think maybe what hurts it more is the new villains are yet again at an all-time low. In episode 4 we meet Vortex, this giant tornado ghost who can change the weather at will. Vlad frees him and uses his power to predict the weather for the townsfolk, resulting in them liking him more, which he cares about, I guess. This then leads to Danny getting zapped and getting weather powers of his own, it changing based on his emotions. Being a hormonal teen, hit the fucking deck. Other than that, we also have a Morpho, a shape-shifting ghost who disguises himself as Danny to ruin his recently redeemed Neum. It's a neat idea, but he himself is uninteresting. They both wind up getting stuck in their current forms and have to find a way to undo it before— wait, that's just the same as last idea. Finally got to see what Urban Jungle was about, and oh boy did this need to be a 45-minute special. I can imagine that's what they had planned on before it having to be stripped of half its length. It basically just starts at that halfway mark. Danny, Sam, and Tucker are walking down the street before the ghostly undergrowth comes from the ground, overrunning the town with plant life and other stuff. He's voiced by Mark Hamill, which is neat I suppose, but he's without a doubt the most uninteresting villain in the entire series. Along with Vortex, fuck both these guys. It's just one big prolonged action sequence with Danny having to save Sam from his mind control. It's fucking sweet visually, but that's literally it. There's absolutely nothing going on here. Final new villain we meet here is in Frightmare, where we see Nocturne, a ghost who's been putting the residents of Amity Park into a deep sleep to absorb their dream energy. This was a really cool episode, definitely one of the best of the season. His design is great too, I love that flat space texture on him that's like, it's like that chowder effect, what's that called? Unmoving plaid. I'm just gonna call it the chowder effect. Oh my god, was that a Michael Jackson arrest joke? What the fuck? Similarly to season 2, instead of introducing too many new villains here, we instead focus on the returning. Although it sucks because, again, with the smaller episode count, we really don't get to see them shine as much as they did there. Again, that was like 4 new villains right there, paired with the 5 ones with Vlad. The Vortex one also counts as a Vlad episode, meaning only 4 of these remaining episodes even have the chance to focus on any recurring ghost. And so as a way around this, they just start combining them all into one episode. I said back in season 1 that I really liked the episodes that would do crossovers with 2 ghost antagonists for Danny, but if anything, I think they overdo it here. The box ghost episode is fine, where he actually tries to be taken as a threat for once by stealing Pandora's box, and I also don't mind the camping one, which sees Walker return to try and find Wolf, who we get to see again. But other than those 2 episodes, and one other which just spams them all over the place, we don't get to see any of the previous foes in any meaningful way. Livin' Large sees the Guys in White by Fenton works from Jack and Maddie for an absurdly large amount of money, making them rich. Guess what happens? Danny becomes overrun with how rich he is, becomes a douche who thinks he's too cool for school and leaving his house. His friends start to not like him, so needs to apologize while finding out why they wanted his lab in the first place because, like, last time we saw them, they agreed to leave the Fentons alone, but— wait, that's not supposed to be there! And by far my least favorite episode, quite possibly of the entire show, would have to be Girls' Night Out. There is some law out there that mandates every cartoon ever must have the obligatory girl power episode, where all the girl characters get together to show how cool they are. Because they're girls. In concept, I don't have any problem with it, but in a series like Danny Phantom, like, What are you doing? None of these villains are all that fleshed out, especially not Penelope, Spectra, Ember, and Kitty. In my opinion, they are honestly 3 of the least interesting bad guys in the show. And so instead of doing anything to show me why I should find them cool, they instead take the completely backwards approach of revolving them completely around men. Their characters here are that they are indeed girls. They immediately fail the Bechdel test by having their entire motivation revolve around boyfriends. Kitty's pissed off at Johnny, and Ember is pissed off at her boyfriend. Skulker? They're together? That seems kind of weird to just throw out there. I think they were literally just looking for a reason to have her want to be a part of this. And so they use their powers to have every man in Amity Park disappear, with Sam, Jazz, and Maddie having to team up to get them back. Hooray! I think what I dislike most about this approach to storytelling is that it only serves to make the world smaller. I know they only have a small number of villains to cycle through, but I just don't like this idea they've set up where all these ghosts just cohabitate with each other and get in relationships and complain about their boyfriends. Ember apparently has a house somewhere where she has a TV and a remote and a couch for it to get lost in. Kinda makes them less threatening to know that there's not much difference between them and any other human, other than the fact that they have ghost powers. I don't know, maybe it's not a huge deal, and it's mostly a problem with this season as a whole. Again, like having Vlad now live in Danny's town and all. But I think it simply marks the point in which the show stopped progressing. It's now become what I had enjoyed it not doing. Being complacent.
I'm going... well, you know...
There are a couple new friendly faces thrown in here too, and a slight attempt to progress the plot at times. Frostbite comes to mind the most. He's introduced in the second episode of the season where it's revealed that his species have the Infamap, a map of the Ghost Zone that can take you to not only anywhere you want, but also anywhere. These guys also return briefly in the episode Urban Jungle, in which they teach Danny how to adapt to his growing ice powers, it being revealed to us that's what his ghost sense has been all along. It's ice, not a spidey sense, I swear. It's so lame to me. Again, it's apparent they had to cut all the content out of this episode and only got across the bare essentials. Like in The Ultimate Enemy, there was so much focus on Danny trying to unlock the whale power. It actually meant something when he finally did it. Showcasing how what he's gone through and choosing to take a different path to Dark Danny has led to him getting the power way sooner than he should have. It was like a reward for him making the right choice, but nah, he just learns it through a quick montage. He's gotta get back, guys. Come on, we only have a couple minutes left. Overall, the show just feels so removed from what it was. Right off the bat, things feel different. You can really tell a major voice in the production has left as the new and old writers scramble to fill the void. The side characters barely even return here. We rarely see Dash or Paulina. The only continuity they keep up with for the most part is the growing relationship between Danny and Sam. By the end of the season, they really make an effort to include at least one moment per episode where they look at each other and blush, but don't do anything because that would mean committing to a permanent story change relating to our main character, and they can't do that because it would make airing the show out of order a nightmare. But it really does feel like they're building to something with them, at least. One thing I could not stop thinking, however, the further we got in was, where the fuck is Valerie? She was once such a major part of the series, but now, nowhere to be seen. I seriously thought they were just going to ignore her and act like she was never there, but thankfully we did finally get another episode with her. In the penultimate episode. Hope you didn't like this character or anything, because this is her last role of importance. Her return is also shared by the comeback of Danny Phantom with an eye. It's actually a pretty good episode for once, with Danny returning to Amity Park to seek help as she's slowly been dissolving, with Vlad saying this and sending Valerie out to capture her for him so he can kill her once and for all. However, Danny steps in and saves her, injecting her with a serum that completely cures her with no risk of ever melting again. There's this completely random moment, however, where Danny transforms and gets concerned that Valerie saw him. Never comes up again, that's it. The one person she does see change, though, is Vlad, as we end with her catching him announcing his evil plans and describing how he tricked her. And so with that, she makes it her mission to kill Vlad Plasmius. Again, last appearance. And all that leads us into the finale, Phantom Planet. By far the most heated episode in the show's history. Everything has been building to this, and I'm incredibly intrigued to see just what pissed so many people off with this ending. Damn, they really wanted to let you know this was a big event, even opening on that Nickelodeon Presents thing they used to do. If you couldn't already tell it was a big event by the excessive amounts of CG used here. Opening on space as we see Vlad using the Infamap he stole off screen to get some ectoranium. However, during the preceding battle with Danny and friends, Vlad's machine blows up right next to an asteroid, causing it to head right towards Earth. Oh, that's the plot of your finale, a natural disaster storyline? Hooray! I hate these, seriously. There's no villain, just an emotionless rock hurtling towards their home. There's not even an action scene by the end. It's just so boring to me, especially for a finale for this show. Because spoilers, Vlad disappears from this thing halfway through and only returns at the end for a brief gag cameo. And don't worry, it only gets worse. So around this time, a new radical trio of ghost hunters show up, Masters Blasters, putting not only Danny's parents to shame, but him too. The town has almost completely moved on from needing Danny Phantom with the new guys taking up all the spotlight, and so with that, Danny frustratingly laments that there's not even a need for Danny Phantom anymore. With that thought, Danny returns to where it all began. He steps inside the ghost portal and turns it on, zapping him and getting rid of all his ghost powers.
You mean step back into the Fenton portal, remove his ghost powers, and revert his DNA profile back to that of a normal human?
Thanks for filling us in. That's a pretty good idea for a finale, honestly. I think it's all written a little too conveniently. Like, now Danny is just fucking incompetent at using his powers against the ghosts he has literally fought countless times. But whatever, if it were for the purpose of getting him here, then that's fine. That's a cool idea. It's how everyone reacts to this that fucking sucks.
I don't have my ghost powers anymore! I'm normal again! Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Great.
From the literal second Danny does this, Sam, Tucker, and Jazz all not completely lose interest in Danny, getting saddened at the fact that they can't go on ghost adventures anymore, coming off like they almost resent Danny for what he did.
I really can't believe you did that. It feels like I lost a good friend, someone I was just starting to get to know.
Yeah, Danny, you asshole. There's no room to breathe with this. It's not a reveal that they tell him. They're desperately trying to get through this because there's too much going on here, and so they have to remove all the depth out of this B story, basically. I think what I hate so much about this idea is that it could work. The problem simply comes from Butch Hartman having to write everything as straightforward as possible. And in this case, there's no one to point to other than him. He was the sole writer for this thing. It's too easy to think Danny gets rid of his powers, so all of his friends are mad at him for being so selfish. Genius! Because it only works if you ignore all their history together. It's heavily implied that these guys have been friends long before he became Danny Phantom, yet when he's back to a regular kid, it's like they have nothing to fucking do now. And again, I think that idea would be good, if it were instead executed in a way to reflect the idea that Danny's been through so much life-changing stuff, not only for him, but for his friends too. Like, instead of everyone just sitting around now frowning and crossing their arms, what if Sam, Tucker, and Jazz just, I don't know, continued fighting ghosts?
I'll always be your friend, Danny, and I'll always be there for you, but I can't live life just sitting on the sidelines.
Do something then! You still have equipment, you've faced these guys before, you regularly interact with Vlad, who you know has a ghost portal, that you know the location of. If you want to do something, then just fucking do it. At least then it could be more like, okay, Danny, well, you don't want to fight ghosts anymore, but it's something we want to continue, even if you don't. Then at the very least it wouldn't put Danny in such a corner, basically being, continue fighting ghosts and putting your life in danger, or we'll consistently resent you for the rest of your life, and constantly express this resentment to you. When if anything, they're being the selfish ones here for not considering Danny's feelings. What really sucks is that I actually think the special picks up immensely from this point, with the asteroid coming towards Earth. Vlad decides it's the perfect opportunity to reveal to the world that he's a ghost. This is a monumental moment, and one that I think is executed really well. I love the talk he and Jack have a little later. All that character stuff is great. It's just this stuff between Danny and his friends that hold it back, which sucks because it takes up almost the entire middle portion. From here, Vlad wants to make a deal. If the world comes together to give him $500 billion and makes him the ruler of Earth, he'll go up and make the asteroid intangible. However, upon doing so, he realizes that it's made of ecto-uranium, meaning no ghost can touch it. And when all seems lost and humanity is a goner, Danny, Sam, and Tucker pitch their own idea to build this giant ghost device that will wrap itself around Earth, and not make the asteroid intangible, but the Earth. Only issue is it needs a great deal of ghost energy to activate it, and all this stuff I personally thought was great. Danny goes to the ghost zone to try and get everybody's help, but they kick the shit out of him and zap him, which reactivates the tiny bit of ghost energy still inside his body, represented through the white streak in his hair, turning him back into Danny Phantom. With all that, the ghosts come to Earth to help out. The asteroid goes through the planet, and Danny is now known throughout the world as the Savior of Earth. Not only that, but his parents have also figured out his secret. Off-screen. But it's permanent this time, no takebacks. Sam and Danny also finally kiss for real this time. Her even giving him back the ring that he was going to give Valerie back in Season 2, that's a callback. Oh yeah, speaking of, remember how much attention was put on Danny and Valerie's rivalry back in Season 2? How much stakes there were around her potentially finding out he's Danny Phantom, or him worrying that she saw him transform literally one episode ago. Miss it? There you go, that's your payoff, just a face in a crowd cheering him on. Cool. This finale was clearly rushed. The season was not building towards this at all, but even then, what was there to build towards? Nothing really happened. It was a complete chance that this sent the asteroid crashing towards Earth. There's not even a payoff for Vlad. He's abandoned in space, lamenting how he's just revealed his secret identity to the whole world with nothing to show for it. He can never live a normal life ever. Oh no, never mind, he's dead. It somehow gets even worse. With no more Vlad, Tucker gets elected mayor of Amity Park. Okay, that is a very Butch Hartman thing to do. Give the character the best possible ending despite how little sense it makes. And Sam and Danny fly off into the sunset, finally being together. It's weird, there's a lot of elements I like about Phantom Planet, but also a lot I don't. I simultaneously think it's overheated and over-defended at the same time, with a lot of fans now vocalizing that the pure disdain towards this finale was a little overblown, and I can see what they mean. Again, I think the second half is actually pretty good, bizarre ending aside, but that terribly contrived and drawn-out start and the questionable choices for the ending really cement in my mind that this was a pretty poor finale, good things aside. My biggest issue, though, would have to be how they handled Sam. They make her so unreasonable in that first half that they wind up undoing all the genuine bonding her and Danny have had over the course of the season, putting me in the position where I can't be happy that they're finally together by the end. She was an asshole. It's shitty to know this wouldn't have happened if he didn't succumb to getting his ghost powers back. Either way, with that, Danny Phantom was cancelled for good, ending its short-lived but still not awful 3-year run. Overall, I don't think Season 3 was the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't call it terrible, not even bad really, but the issue mainly comes from it having to follow up what came before. If most of these episodes happened in Season 1, I don't think people would bat an eye, but the problem is that it constantly felt like the show had been building on itself, continuing storylines and exploring each side of every character, whereas Season 3 just features 11 relatively unrelated adventures before randomly deciding that it was gonna end, nothing building towards that. Many people have speculated for years about why Danny Phantom was truly cancelled. Butch is a prideful man, so as far as I'm aware he won't go any further than just saying, ratings. Not enough people watched it. It wasn't as successful as SpongeBob and whatnot. Usually when a show gets cancelled for this reason, people scream and cry about that not being fair. That the show is really good and people like it, so they shouldn't get rid of it. But in my opinion, it's like, what else do you expect? If the studio is consistently producing the series at a loss and already give it 3 seasons to prove itself, then there's really no need to keep it around, even if it is really good. It seems, though, there may be more to that than meets the eye, when it comes to the reasoning for its cancellation. And if true, then it paints an entirely different light on the situation, a light which makes it obvious as to why Butch refuses to elaborate in the details. I find various different posts over the internet that offer different theories as to why the series was cancelled, so let's go over a couple. 1. Butch spent too much money. The rumor goes that Butch seriously began going over budget on Danny Phantom, with specials like Rainstorm costing thousands more than initially promised. It seems like that could be the case with how fantastic the visuals are in this show. You know, it doesn't look cheap, probably not helped by the excessive use of CG. If this were true, it would mean it wasn't necessarily poor ratings that killed the show, more likely poor ratings in relation to what they were spending, along with Butch being unreliable. 2. The Ultimate Enemy plus Field Video Games plus Burger King. Apparently when making the Ultimate Enemy special, Butch requested $2 million from Nickelodeon to simply advertise the episode, in which Nick promised it on one condition. We give you $2 million to advertise this, but in exchange, we want to see $5 million in return. And with that, Butch set off, hoping that the planned video game and Burger King toy promotional deal would bring in more than enough profits to make up for this enormous ask. So just how much did they end up making? $50,000. Yikes. Again, I think. I have to specify this is all just shit I've read online, anybody could be saying this. But considering what the game released on, and at the time it did, along with THQ and Burger King taking cuts from whatever profits too, I can imagine this was pretty close to what they ended up making. And finally, 3. Where's the toys, Butch? Okay, things aren't going too good so far. But wait, Butch says. Look at this show. It's ripe for a plethora of cool toys that will fill the aisles. There's no way any kid could deny the epicness of a Jazz Fenton action figure. And so with that, Butch set out to find a toy manufacturer. But by that rate, it was too late. Word had spread around about how much of a failure Danny Phantom was, so nobody wanted to even touch it. With no one willing to make toys, that was yet another branch Nick couldn't make money from. And so with ratings not even being that good in the first place, they decided it would finally be time for Danny Phantom to end. Either tell me I'm right or a fucking idiot in the comments below for believing this shit, but at the end of the day, sounds believable. So, there Danny goes, to fade into obscurity and never be seen again. Until Butch decided, fuck that, if you don't want to do anything with it, fine, but I will. And so he made a request to purchase the rights to Danny Phantom from Nickelodeon, with them promptly laughing in his face and shutting the door. I mean, who knows when they might want to bring it back, right? Just last year, a massive shock came to everyone. Danny Phantom is back! In book form. With absolutely no involvement from Butch Hartman, Nickelodeon greenlit a Danny Phantom graphic novel series, to be written and drawn by an entirely different team. A glitch in time despite unironically opening on a "you're probably wondering how I got here" moment. It's actually pretty good. I don't want to go too in-depth, this book is still new, so if you're a fan of Danny Phantom, well, first, why wouldn't you have it already, but be sure to pick it up. If anything, it has some really nice artwork. It's not one-to-one with the show's style, but that was for the best. It works better like this in book form. Gonna be honest, at first I was really concerned. There were a couple elements here that I was not feeling. It picks up a couple years after the show's finale, giving us a future in which Emily Park is a whole team of ghost hunters, including Paulina and Dash and the other bully characters. Okay. Tucker got fired as mayor 48 hours after getting elected for dropping a baby, which was pretty funny. But now he's a live streamer and we get to hear about cool apps like Spectrogram. Just shit that I'm not into, I don't need it to be this modernized. It doesn't ruin it though, because thankfully the story is where it really shines. Danny's now a hero, but uh-oh, his powers have been slowly fading. He doesn't know what to do as Vlad makes a return to announce a horrifying truth. Dark Danny has been freed. We learn that Vlad returned to the Ghost Zone to ask Clockwork for another chance at life, but during their battle they accidentally unleashed him from the Fenton Thermos, him fusing with Clockwork to not control all of time. So now it's up to Danny, Sam Tucker, and Vlad to find the ultimate power and defeat him. I love how much we get to see the characters interact here. Now that Butch isn't writing, they've been given a bit more depth. We learn of Vlad's regrets, we find out more about the Ghost Zone. That every ghost is a manifestation of human emotion, and that after a long enough time they'll lose what made them human, which explains all those simple little ghost PNGs floating around all the time. Bit of a weird retcon, but I'll take it over monsters. Danny's powers have been draining because he hasn't had anything to fight for now that Amity Park is ghost-free and that he saved the day. And so to fix things he wants to resign from being a ghost hunter, and instead takes up a new mantle as a ghost helper. Little lame, I won't lie. I don't know why New Kids stuff is just so opposed to having clear-cut villains or heroes that fight them. There always has to be some mindset of redemption. Like Danny trying to show forgiveness to Dark Danny, he literally killed your parents. But I think here at least it works fine. After defeating Dark Danny, Clockwork shows the trio that with the time stream this fucked up, there are two options for them. Either return back to Earth where everything will stay the same, which will lead to him losing his powers eventually, or return to Amity Park directly after the events of the finale, with the only difference being nobody knows about his secret identity, letting him continue as Danny Phantom. Of course, he picks the second, basically undoing Phantom Planet from the timeline, but they remember it at least, so it's not a complete reset. Now Vlad is no longer the mayor, Danny is back in hiding, this time with a new goal to help the ghosts instead of hunt them, and Vlad puts Dark Danny's spirit inside one of his Danny clones, with what happens from here being left up in the air. It's a good read. Not a fan of every choice it makes, but it gives a really clear idea of how Danny Phantom could have continued if given the chance to make Season 4 or a revival series. But if that revival never comes and Danny only continues to exist through these graphic novels, with another coming shortly in the future, then I think I'd be cool with that. Okay, while working on this video, Butch Hartman made a post saying he would want Tom Holland to play Danny Phantom in a live-action movie, and now Paramount are apparently trying to make that a reality, Jesus Christ. It's just because he likes Spider-Man, that's literally it. Hopefully this never sees the light of day. The Kim Possible live-action movie was bad enough, and this would most likely be the same caliber. And with that, we've reached the end of this retrospective on the entirety of Danny Phantom. And if anything, I'm glad I've finally been able to check out this series. I've really grown a newfound respect for it. It's not perfect in that final season really is a drag, but I think it's safe to say at the end of the day, Danny Phantom is a good show. Maybe not great, but good. It's amassed a huge cult audience in the past couple years, most likely the main reason it was able to come back as a graphic novel. But for the foreseeable future, I don't see any animated continuation happening. It's too risky. We're not quite at the point of the mid-2000s nostalgia yet, especially for a show that wasn't even that successful in the first place. And with the way Nick is going in recent times, would you even want it? The show is arguably more popular than ever. I actually see merchandise for it at Box Lunch and Hot Topic a lot. Don't ask why I'm in there. If they brought it back, Nick would just drop a mediocre season all at once on Paramount Plus. It would be CG, of course. They would remove it like a week later, and then it would yet again fade into obscurity. Be thankful you don't have that yet. Maybe not everything needs to come back in a major way. Maybe the novels are all you need. But even ignoring all that, and the video games and the development and cancellation, just looking at Danny Phantom, the series, on its own, left me pretty satisfied.
Thanks, boy genius.
No problem, dumbass. Remember cartoon crossovers? It's weird, I feel like we never see them done anymore, at least not in the scale they once were. You got the Simpsons and the Critic crossover, the Steven Universe Uncle Grandpa one that made everybody really mad but I actually think is really funny, or the Family Guy Simpsons special. I like to forget about that one. The last one I can really remember happening on a larger scale was the Supernatural Scooby-Doo event. But even then, one of those shows wasn't even animated. I'm not sure why studios don't see much value in doing these as much anymore. Perhaps it's a result of most shows now getting cancelled after 1 or 2 seasons, and so they can't guarantee both shows will still be on the air by the time of its release. If you're not a platform fighter or cheaply made chibi shorts with no voice acting, ew, then you're not going to be seeing many crossovers in this day and age. Which is a shame, because they're cool. I mean, do I even need to explain why? It's fun and exciting to see characters that you never thought could ever meet come together to share screen time, getting to explore each other's worlds. For a kid, it makes you feel like anything is possible. It's insane. Those 2 shows that I watch, at least for a short period of time, are allowed to become one. And none blew me away more than the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours, which saw the main characters of the Fairly OddParents and the Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, God, you couldn't have picked a shorter name, swapping dimensions and having to find a way to get back home.
Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, Timmy Turner.
In my opinion, Nickelodeon in the mid-2000s were the kings of crossing over their many iconic franchises. Of course, we have the holy grail of cartoon crossovers, the Nicktoons Unite saga, which saw SpongeBob, Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron, and Timmy Turner, sometimes more, Timmy also got fucked in the last one, banding together to take down either their respective villains or an entirely new threat that wants to take over the multiverse. One of my favorite aspects of that series was how they didn't reset between games. You know, once all these guys were introduced to each other, they continued to be aware of their existence, even filling in some of the newer Nicktoons that were introduced as the series continued.
Look, it's Timmy Turner. Look, it's Jimmy Neutron.
Jimmy Hootron?
Oh, he's a friend of ours. We go way, way back.
But that all started with the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, which aired on Nickelodeon in 2004. Sponsored by Cheetos for some reason. Not a whole lot is known about the behind-the-scenes development of this incredibly ambitious project, with the Fairly OddParents creator Butch Hartman claiming that the executives of Nickelodeon at the time specifically requested it, which was cool. You know, because of how obsessed I was with Nicktoons Unite at the time, I assumed that soon Nick would be releasing a crossover between SpongeBob and Danny Phantom to go along with it. But it never came. I can only assume Nick saw massive potential in this project due to the similarities between both shows. They're both polar opposites, but somehow managed to blend perfectly. You know, Timmy, Jimmy, one has magic, the other has science, one is 2D, the other's 3D. Sometimes the best ideas come from the oddest of places. Fairly Oddest, but this seemed like a massive undertaking, with both shows presumably being made under completely different pipelines. But I think what works so well about them is that they managed to use that to their advantage. Instead of trying to blend these 2 disparate series together, they instead embraced their differences, and chose to have it be more of a celebration of the 2 rather than a combining. Despite being, well, 2 years old, I fucking love the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. And clearly I wasn't alone in that, with it doing so well that Nick not only ordered an immediate sequel, but also a threequel, resulting in a final special that, almost, acted as a finale to the Fairly OddParents. Didn't happen though. And so, fittingly, today I wanted to have a power hour of my own. I've had to train myself to not say par-ar, to discuss in excruciating detail each and every one of these crossovers. Do they hold up as well as I remember? Are there elements that have aged poorly? Does Timmy still look horrible in 3D? The answer to all these questions is yes. You know, I really wish there were more info about these specials online. Jimmy Neutron is in a strange place where its creators, Keith Alcorn and John Ed Davis, are nowhere near the level as well known as someone like Butch Hartman. Maybe not for good reasons, albeit, but they seem so low profile comparatively. And so all we really have to go off of is Butch Hartman's word. And upon checking out his behind the scenes video on his YouTube channel, I was reminded of exactly what compelled me to make that rant video when I was 16. And it's that these videos have no fucking substance whatsoever. I've met Butch in person a couple times, one of those being for the interview I did. And one thing I certainly picked up on is that getting a detailed story from the man is near impossible. Like him or not, Butch has been involved in the animation industry for years, and by far has had the most extensive career out of anyone at Nickelodeon. You think he would have a plethora of cool and interesting stories to tell about the inner workings of having multiple shows on the air, during arguably Nickelodeon's peak. But no, everything is told in the most quick, safest way possible, like he's talking PR to you. Oh hey Butch, what was it like working on this thing? Oh, you know, it was a great project, everyone on it was super talented and amazing, it was a tough job and we had some complications, but it came out great and people loved it. Thanks. It's just like, I want to know more. How was it working with the Jimmy Neutron staff? How much of a challenge was it translating Timmy to 3D? What was the working environment like at Nickelodeon at the time? But you watch through his video and all he really says is, yep, we were told to make a crossover, it was cool, and everybody loved it. Yeah, thanks, I know that already. Anyways, the hype for this was insane. They were promoting the shit out of it. And you bet your ass they made a crappy Flash game to go along with it. Hell yeah. Anyways, with the first Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, I always thought it was really clever that they treated it less like a crossover and more of a switching realities gimmick. You know, what if Jimmy was in Timmy's place and Timmy was in Jimmy's place, having to deal with each other's usual problems? They set it all up in a pretty genius way too. And by genius, I mean simple, but hey, it works. With the upcoming Dimsdale Science Fair, Timmy, who still has yet to start his project, decides to wish himself in the greatest lab in the universe, which just so happens to be the lab of Jimmy Neutron. Which never really made sense to me because I always assumed they were from different universes, but whatever, if we want to pick apart the logic of the Nicktoons universe, I think you're watching this for the wrong reasons. After accidentally grabbing Timmy's auto poofer, which he's always had on person in every episode since the pilot, Jimmy is transported to the world of the Fairly Odd Parents, in which we just kind of forget about him for a bit. The story cleverly keeps the two worlds pretty separate. Once Jimmy is in Dimsdale, he's restricted to his own plot, and vice versa. Trying to find a way to combine these two worlds would have been way too much work to cover, and so I think it's smart that, in a way, both of these could cut together to create two standalone episodes of each other's show. You know, if you spliced all the Jimmy parts together and spliced all the Timmy parts together, it's almost like they could have released this as two special event episodes for each series. Like, what happened to Jimmy when he disappeared? Well, now you gotta watch the Fairly Odd Parents to find out. That would have been a fucking nightmare for reruns, though. Good they didn't go with that. The purpose of this special is more so to see each show's main character interact with the world of the other. And so we get to see Timmy explore Retroville and hang out with Jimmy's friends, while Jimmy is just kind of stuck on his own. I like that because of the switch-up, we get to see Timmy experience what it's like to be around normal, non-Butch Hartman-written individuals who have more than one character trait. Whereas Jimmy gets the opposite treatment. He gets to now assume Timmy's position, getting ignored by his parents, dealing with Vicky and all his classmates who are more obnoxious than ever, along with Mr. Crocker, who obviously notices that something is up, stealing his invention and using it to finally transport him to Fairy World. I can't believe such a major moment happened in the fucking Jimmy Neutron crossover. But comparatively, Timmy gets a pretty chill day out of it. Hanging out with Carl and Sheen, Cindy falls in love with him. It's only by the end when things start to fuck up with him installing a video game into Goddard that corrupts him, turning him into a giant monster who grows stronger with every defeat. I like that even in the Fairly Odd Parents world, Timmy's game is CG for some reason. Imagine if your video game looked better than real life. It was always so dumb to me that nobody, except for Cindy I guess, was able to tell that this wasn't Jimmy and that this wasn't Timmy. I guess it only goes to show the similarities in both of these series, writing half the secondary cast to be dumbasses. But even then, I think they somewhat get away from it. It doesn't take away from anything. You know, these are both characters who have previously turned themselves into a variety of stupid shit before, so it's not terribly out of the ordinary. Other than that, though, Goddard becoming a monster and Crocker invading Fairy World, most of this special is just allowing the characters to interact. Ironically, Timmy and Jimmy are the ones to get the least amount of screen time together. But can you imagine if this wasn't a 44-minute special and was restricted to being 22 or hell, even 11 minutes? I can't imagine it would be anywhere near as well remembered. I mean, just look at that OKKO crossover where he, Garnet from Steven Universe, Raven from Teen Titans Go, and Bantan from Bantan joined forces to save the Tooniverse. Despite the creator wanting it to be longer, the network would only give them 11 minutes. And so the entire thing, while cool, feels incredibly rushed like a proof of concept. There's no time to breathe. That's why I don't think we'll ever get anything on this kind of level again. Networks just aren't interested. Now that I think about it, though, it might be because every show now is just direct to streaming, and so if one show is bought by Netflix and then the other show gets dumped on HBO Max, which network will get the crossover? I don't know. Anyways, by far the most exciting prospect of having these shows crossover would have to be the animation. These two art styles couldn't be any more different. And so I'm sure it created major complications during production. It's probably why they decided to keep things small and only have the main characters switch worlds. Therefore, they only have to make a model of Timmy and a model sheet for Jimmy, that's it. Jimmy looks perfect in the Fairly OddParents art. He was translated to their style excellently, which means there's no way in hell Butch designed it.
My arms! My dip! It's gone!
Did you see how he reimagined other shows for a potential Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 4 he made for YouTube? Ugh.
And then Timmy, of course, I thought would just be a cute little bear.
Yeah, bear, not a beaver. There it is, Butch, I drew it for you. And look, there's you, just for fun. But yeah, Jimmy does not look out of place at all. Timmy, on the other hand. Okay, so the Jimmy Neutron team clearly had the tougher job here, having to translate Timmy's design with his extremely cartoony proportions. And look, we can all agree it looks weird and kinda ugly, but at the same time, for all the bad I can say, I don't know, I kinda like it. Obviously, the biggest hurdles they had to cross here were characters' eyes, mouths, and body shapes, something that the Jimmy Neutron team did not exclusively struggle with. I mean, just look at the live-action movies. But it took us until, like, a week ago to finally get Fairly OddParents characters that look good in 3D. That head shape is naturally just something hard to translate. Some could argue they didn't bother translating him at all. You know, they just made him in 3D as literally as possible based off his initial design instead of trying to get him to conform to the Jimmy art style. But I wouldn't agree with that at all. Really, the only thing that would give me that impression are his giant bulging eyes and eyebrows. The fact that their eyes come out of their head is a lot more noticeable when they're as big and squinty as Timmy's. Along with the fact that they still didn't bother giving him actual shoes, still opting for that weird pants thing Timmy wears. I don't even know how I would describe that. But you know, they evidently did make an effort to have him conform to the art style. Whether or not they succeeded, though, is up to you.
We've got to scour this town of evil.
I get it. You want to play one of those special games, eh?
What? They made him less sharp, you know, his hat droops over more. They bothered giving him proper irises and 5 fingers. Honestly, the thing that looks most off about him to me would have to be the colors. In promotional artwork, he looks fine, but in the actual episode, he's way too desaturated. His skin is so pale, and the colors don't pop nearly as much as they should. Anyways, I still think they did as good a job as they could of adapting him. Some would argue his mouth is a dead giveaway, but I think that's to forget that this is a mouth style that Jimmy Neutron characters have unfortunately had before. Just look at this freak. Even then, while Jimmy Neutron has admittedly aged pretty poorly visually, I still think it was incredibly impressive for the time. And the team consistently used it to show off what couldn't be done in 2D, like how much they loved their spinning camera shots by the end. Even better, I can tell exactly who's responsible for this, as a couple years back one of the animators shared their work on this special, and what do you know, there it is. This is super cool to see. You know what though, I'll never fucking get over how at the end, Timmy comes out of Goddard's mouth, but we get a close-up shot of it, and there's no hole. Where the fuck did he come out of? I think what the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour does best, however, is managing to show off both of these shows at the same time while still not sacrificing the voice of either. The Jimmy Neutron segments still feel like Jimmy Neutron, while the Fairly OddParents segments still feel like Fairly OddParents. That may seem like such a non-point to bring up, but may I again draw your attention to The Simpsons Guy, which was so clearly written by the Family Guy staff, and therefore all the Simpsons characters just feel kinda off. We have Homer basically just being Peter too. We have uncomfortable scenes like Lisa being shown a string of cuts down Meg's arm. Well, half of the Simpsons secondary cast weren't even in the crossover because their voice actor flat out refused to take part. I think a large part of this would have to go towards the sound design. They did a really good job at keeping each of their vibes alive, especially in the scenes where we see them talking to each other from their respective worlds. You know, we'll have Guy Moon sound effects cutting back from... Okay, who composed for Jimmy Neutron? See, this is what I'm talking about. Why do we know so much more about Fairly OddParents? Charlie Brissett. I'll sing it from the rooftops if I have to. I like the cue to the Oh Yeah Cartoons pilot when Cosmo and Wanda introduce themselves to Jimmy.
I'm Cosmo! And I'm Wanda! And we're...
I'm not one for mindless references being shoved into media, but the one exception I have is for crossovers, in which, you know, go all out. That's the point. I've talked about it a bit before, but when I was growing up, Nickelodeon were rarely airing Jimmy Neutron, and so I was largely exposed to the series from these crossover episodes. But really, while watching, I only really knew about Fairly OddParents. Jimmy, Carl, and Sheen may as well have been Butch's own creations in my mind. So after finally having watched some of the series, I can now say that I'm really impressed with just how much of each show they managed to shove in. It must have been really cool as a kid getting to see Timmy Turner interacting with all Jimmy's inventions from previous episodes and even the movie. And seeing Jimmy talking to Cosmo and Wanda and going to Timmy's school was incredibly fun. I love when introducing himself he always has to say his full name.
I'm Jimmy Neutron. No, Jimmy Neutron. I'm Jimmy Neutron.
But there's a bunch of stuff I picked up on here, like the car that Vicky drives him in being the same one she steals from Timmy's dad in that one episode. Pretty sure this is also the first time we learn about the big wand, which powers all the magic in Fairy World. This started to appear a few more times in the rest of the series before being forgotten about. I think they pull something out of their ass later like, oh, it turns out that Crocker's the one powering Fairy World because he believes in fairies. Yeah, like that's not a fucking dumbass power source. You know, believing in a species that you're not allowed to let anyone know the existence of. What happens when Crocker drops dead? Answer me that. That's what I thought, asshole. And they even managed to throw in Timmy's long-forgotten catchphrase. You know, where he'd say, let's get, then some word that applies to the current predicament. I always liked that.
Let's get experimental. I love this new smart-headed Jimmy.
I often see complaints about this special directed towards Timmy in particular, criticizing how annoying he is. You know, he's pretty antagonistic towards a guy whose lab he just broke into. But I don't know, I think it works. I never liked crossovers where the main characters all become immediate best friends. There's so much more interesting conflicts to come out of them hating each other, having them build up to being friends at the end. Timmy and Jimmy are two incredibly strong personalities, and so it makes sense why they wouldn't like each other. Of course, Timmy wouldn't like a self-proclaimed boy genius, and obviously Jimmy wouldn't like a kid who's used to getting whatever he wants. Also, I'd argue that Timmy's assholishness tendencies are matched equally by Jimmy's pig-headedness. You know, when he finds out Timmy saved Goddard, he's still more than willing to let Cosmo and Wanda die because he sees no value in them. But it works because it all comes together greatly with the ending, where both parties are able to recognize that just because they don't see value in something, that it doesn't mean somebody doesn't. Jimmy understanding that in the same way he can love Goddard, who isn't real, that Timmy can also love Cosmo and Wanda, who he thinks are mere computer programs. And so him deciding to suit up and use his wits to defend Fairy World is a really epic moment, genuinely. Much better than the boss fight they made out of this for Nicktoons Unite, that's for sure.
As long as that machine is draining fairy magic, we can't do anything to him. But we can make fun of his outfit. Nice pants!
The ending to this special is fantastic, with Timmy wishing he and Jimmy could once again switch places, and the two finally getting to meet on equal ground. Made it even more impressive when you find out about how much the two animation teams struggled to get this handshake to work right, with the two shows being animated completely differently.
Jimmy Neutron, boy genius. Timmy Turner, boy!
The epilogue is fun too, with Jimmy helping out Timmy by using Goddard for his science project. Although I don't know why she'd be impressed, I'd be fucking terrified if I saw this IRL, just look at him. Couldn't have been that hard to just draw a picture of Goddard, could it? But either way, everything is wrapped up nicely to what was at the time a massive event in cartoon history. There's so much good about this special. The art is so fun to look at, the concept of each character having to solve what the other does on a weekly basis is so fun, and I absolutely love that ending. And that's why I think this is the weakest of the three. Might be a controversial take, but I think the first Jimmy Timmy Power Hour is the worst. But not by much. Overall, I really enjoy all three of these, but I think what seriously hinders the first so much is that pacing issue I hinted at before. There is just too much of a break between each part, and I seriously can't tell why. There's so many moments here where you think they could have swapped over, but just don't. And the Jimmy half definitely gets it the worst. You really get the idea that this is more of a Fairly OddParents episode over Jimmy Neutron. You know, we start with Timmy, end with Timmy. Timmy is the only one with an ongoing conflict. Really, it's just Timmy needing to solve a problem and getting wrapped up with the Jimmy Neutron cast while trying to fix it. Jimmy having to see Fairy World isn't even set up until the halfway point. And even then, when it is set up, we have to cut back to Timmy, in which his problem pretty much starts, develops, and ends. All while we're meant to believe that Jimmy is just standing around in Fairy World with Crocker having small talk.
I think I'll take the VIP tour.
But been like 10 minutes, maybe you should have jumped a bit sooner. It's definitely one of those things where I think the cuts made between each show should have been made more frequently as the action rose. That way both of them are taking on their foes at the same time instead of Timmy saving the day right when Jimmy's conflict is getting started. It makes for this constant stop and start, and because of that I often forget about how much of the special is left after Timmy saves Goddard. It doesn't ruin it, but it makes it feel so much slower, and not nearly as grand as it could have been. But that's the issue you have to run into when both of these characters are dealing with completely disconnected problems. Either way, I still love this special, and I do get their thought process, even if I don't think it worked out too well. And with that, this Power Hour comes to a close.
Thanks, boy genius.
Don't mention it, average kid who no one understands.
I hate that line. This special was a massive success on all fronts. I showed it off in my Danny Phantom video, but it was one of the most watched programs on cable that week. Kids were in love with this, and I even recall my mum watching these with me when it would air. Around 5 million people watched this when it aired, not to mention the DVDs and VHS sales. Look, I got both of them. Sweet. And so it not only made sense for Nick to greenlight a sequel, with us receiving, only 1 year later, the follow-up that everybody was asking for. It's time for the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 2, when nerds collide. Another Jimmy Timmy Power Hour? You know what that means. Another Flash game. Wait, okay, this one actually looks kind of fun. I think this is by far the most well-known of the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours. It's definitely the one that aired the most on Nickelodeon, and the one that I was most excited to see come on TV. Funnily enough, this is actually the piece of media that would most get me into art. I remember we had just gotten one of those cable boxes where you could pause and rewind the TV and record stuff, and so I would just sit for hours trying to pause on the perfect exact frames I'd want to draw, and then I'd hang them all around my room, wish I still had those. I think I threw them away at some point. Kids, keep your old art. Also, why are you watching this? Have you even seen one of these shows? This was the one that I was most interested in revisiting. I feel like I've begun seeing more and more people these days coming out of whatever sick, twisted cave they've crawled out of to say the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours aren't very good. What's wrong with you? With the first one, I can certainly see where people are coming from, even if I myself don't personally agree. You know, it's just one of those things where the creativity and concept are cool enough to forgive any issues I have towards piecing. You know, I'd much rather it feel long and drawn out rather than rushed and uneventful. And so I'm hoping the second can, at the very least, keep up the stakes from the first, while not feeling as if these could have been two entirely separate episodes. Right off the bat, was anybody else super sad to see they never bothered actually making a new intro for the second, instead just hastily slapping a 2 at the end? Oh my god, that died. I didn't talk about it last time, because I forgot, but the intro for the specials is solid. Again, I wish there were a different one for each of them, but I understand why they'd rather put that budget somewhere else. One thing I really hated though was the canned laughter in the audience. Come on guys, him turning the fucking boombox into a pig isn't that funny. Ugh. Thankfully, the setup this time around gets into things way quicker, and I really love how they kept continuity between specials. You know, it's not a wacky mishap that also puts Timmy in the world of Jimmy Neutron this time around. Instead, Timmy actively wants to go there now, remembering it to be the only place in the universe where a girl actually likes him.
No girl in the universe would date me. Oh my gosh, it's that boy who talks to inanimate objects.
So Timmy and Jimmy both just so happen to be throwing a Friday the 13th dance on the same day. Uh-oh. And so each of them are now at war over who gets to take Cindy to the dance, which she is more than happy with.
Cindy, are you really gonna let those two guys fight over you?
I thought I might.
Girl, you are my hero.
You know, I always forget that Cindy has the same voice actress as Sandy from SpongeBob. Now that I think about it, it's probably the main reason why they put both these characters in Nicktoons Unite. It's one less paycheck. Anyways, I like how this special showcases a scenario in which Timmy, who lives in a very static world that mostly keeps itself episodic, is being thrown back into Jimmy's world, which has slightly changed since his last visit. See, at that point in time, Fairly OddParents was in its 4th season, while Jimmy Neutron was in its 2nd. And there was actually a pretty major break between the two Power Hours. Over a year and a half. And so the world of Jimmy Neutron, now well into its 3rd season, was a little different. As far as I'm aware, Jimmy Neutron offered slight hints of serialization, whereas Fairly OddParents would often have this in the case of changing the status quo of its secondary characters, like Remy Bucksaplenty losing his godparent or Mark Chang living on Earth as a human for a bit. Instead, Jimmy Neutron would change the dynamics between its cast, like Sheen and Libby getting together at a certain point. No idea how, I just look at them. You know, it's weird that she's never brought up in Planet Sheen. Also bugged me as a kid that after the first couple episodes, Sheen acts like his friends on Earth don't exist. I always got really sad thinking about his ultra dad whose son is now just missing. While looking that up, I find this Nicktoons forum from 2010 where they were, for some reason, speculating about this upcoming cartoon. I bet in the first half of the episode they will all be there. They'll be wishing Sheen goodbye and Libby will kiss Sheen and then he will head off. You poor, poor soul. This is what actually happens in the first half.
Anybody here? I think I left my Ultra Largo's Boom Boom card. Oh, there it is.
But one of those changes to the show was making Jimmy and Cindy more outwardly like each other. Despite being fierce rivals early on, they make it clear that she likes him and he likes her. I love that because of this setup, it actively pits the two of them against each other. You know, we get to see them fight, which was always the coolest part to me as a kid. It's interesting, despite exclusively watching Fairly OddParents when I was younger, I always wanted Jimmy to win, which obviously doesn't happen because Timmy is fucking overpowered and nobody questions how he gets his equipment so fast. But whatever, it's cool. Getting to see Timmy on his own rocket ship and having the two duke it out in the skies. And the dumbass sound effects they use are great.
Oh yeah? Bring it on!
I think what I hate about Timmy so much here is that he just acts so entitled all the time. It's like he never even registers this as an alternate universe, and just acts like it's another thing for him to fuck around with for a bit. Again, a result of them taking a character like Timmy who lives in an extremely exaggerated world, and plopping him in Jimmy Neutron where everyone is relatively normal.
Bye, Nerdtron! Have fun dancing with Sheen!
Again, I never watched Jimmy Neutron and didn't quite know all the characters' names yet, so I was always confused as to what the fuck he was saying here and thought he was going, have fun dancing with sheep, which really bewildered me as a kid. Timmy's attitude doesn't ruin it, although at times it borders on being too much, but I think they balance it well enough. Like last time, because of Jimmy being so full of himself. You know, he's kinda asking for it. He only becomes so adamant about asking Cindy to the dance because someone else might take her instead. I like that the one thing keeping Cindy from going to the dance with Jimmy is that he's an asshole, and I like that the one thing keeping Cindy from going to the dance with Timmy is potentially finding out he's a dumbass loser. This drama takes a backseat though, as we're once again introduced to the anti-fairies, with Anti-Cosmo trying to get his allies out of the fairy world prison. Something really strange to consider is that this special right here is only the second time the anti-fairies appeared in Fairly OddParents. After that first episode, they were locked away for 3 seasons. They're only in like 7 total episodes of that entire show after getting completely trashed in favor of Foop. Basically Butch Hartman's Stewie Griffin. He's seeking out someone from another universe to eat him and rescuing his friends, and gets just what he's looking for in Professor Calamitous, another main antagonist who rarely appears in the show itself. You know, it's like if Plankton was only in 5 episodes of SpongeBob, it's weird. After rescuing his friends and proceeding to immediately betray the professor, it's now up to Jimmy, Timmy, and friends to stop the anti-fairies from making every day Friday the 13th. Then they do that, and there's still 15 minutes left. Yeah, they didn't really fix that problem. Where as soon as one franchise's problem ends, then the other one begins. But it's not nearly as noticeable here because of Jimmy and Timmy constantly being with each other. It's not a case of us forgetting about one of them to instead focus on the other. Still, I like the story for this one a lot. And I enjoy that this special event series has its own continuity, feeling like it picks up right where the last left off, with Carl and Sheen continuing to call Timmy small-headed Jimmy, and Timmy's dad referencing the Buzz Adams outfit Timmy wore to get out of the test in the last one. Seeing Timmy wish for his parents to be rich supermodels though to impress Cindy reminded me of season 10 of The Fairly OddParents, where Chloe Carmichael, remember her, gives Timmy's dad a stock tip that makes him rich. Something you think would just be a quick throwaway gag, but no, they continue to be millionaires throughout the rest of the show. Ugh. Also, barely mentioned them in the video so far, but Cosmo and Wanda are thankfully given much more to do this time. And the first because they were separated from Timmy for 95% of it, and again, all the Fairly OddParents stuff being dumped at the end. I usually forget about any contribution they had, but here that's not the case at all. Even if I do wish we got to see them interact more with Anti-Cosmo and Anti-Wanda. But the act of them involving these magical threats inherently gives them more agency on the matter. And being with Timmy allows them to actually make wishes this time. He even gives them over to Jimmy's friends at a certain point, which allows them to actually, you know, do stuff. We even get to see them come into Jimmy Neutron's world, where they're given their own 3D models. Why do they look better than the actual movie? I think what makes Cosmo and Wanda look so much better here is that they decided not to make their mouths protrude so much, making their expressions a lot easier to read compared to Timmy, whose mouth goes at this bizarre arc when opening too much. Now, the act of seeing these two worlds cross over is obviously going to have less impact compared to last time, simply through the act of just doing it again. But I think they do a good job here at expanding things from the last. Again, we get Cosmo, Wanda, and eventually Jorgen in the Jimmy world. Although for some reason Jimmy keeps calling him Jargon, I don't think they corrected Debbie on that.
Great!
So all we have to do is keep Jorgen angry.
And seeing all Jimmy's friends drawn in the Fairly OddParents style is fun too. I think I like Sheen the most, he's like a worm. This special does a much better job at switching dimensions more often. You don't feel like either show is getting more focus, it's the perfect combination. They also cut a lot more frequently at the start, which allows it not to come off too much like an extended Fairly OddParents episode, with Jimmy Neutron characters. I think Jorgen gets it the worst though, his model is atrocious. And it all comes down to the textures, I think. They already had a tough job adapting him to 3D with that chin especially. You know, I don't envy them having to do this or anything, but I'm just not a fan of the way they rounded him out, giving him these super flat textures looking like simple solid colors. It contrasts strangely against Professor Calamitus's wrinkles and liver spots and makes his expressions hard to notice. I think I like the way they handled it in the Attack of the Toybots video game a lot more, where they instead opted to curve his chin downwards. It's not as accurate, but who cares if it looks better? Something I started noticing in the writing, however, is that I actually vastly enjoy the Jimmy Neutron segments over the Fairly OddParents ones, and I think that's because Jimmy Neutron is just the naturally funnier show. Again, I want to know how they divided the work on this. Did the Jimmy Neutron team only write the Jimmy segments and the Fairly OddParents team only write the Fairly OddParents segments? This is the kind of thing I want to fucking know, butch. The Fairly OddParents always feels like it has to come to a halt to remind you of when they're telling a joke, only to then hold on it for a few seconds until they're sure you understood. When I think the best jokes of that show were always the quicker, more fast-paced ones. The moments that would catch you off guard and move on to something else quickly while you were wondering what the fuck was just said. Now, I think that actually contributed to the show being as popular as it was, not in spite of it. I think the more slow way of storytelling where the characters are constantly stopping to describe what we're seeing on screen allowed it to be pretty universal. You know, you'd have to be a fucking idiot to not follow along. But I don't know, it makes certain episodes age a bit poorly in retrospect and feel a bit too kiddie. Dude, I don't know what to say. I can't watch this kid's cartoon because it feels too much like a kid's cartoon. Comparatively, Jimmy Neutron always had that faster pace and is pretty witty. Despite a lot of the characters being dumb, it never feels like the jokes they're making are.
Yo, I told you I'm coming too. Cindy's my girl.
And we have no lives, so count us in.
And because of that, I think The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, boy genius, just holds up better as a funnier show. Blasphemy coming from this guy, I know. Maybe someday I'll actually have to sit down and marathon the series. I've only seen the first batch of episodes and most of the specials, which were great, like the Survivor parody and the one where Jimmy and Cindy get stranded on an island. It's a pretty short series too, having just a couple more episodes than Danny Phantom. So maybe I'll do a retrospective similar to that sometime, because I've enjoyed everything I've seen so far. Let me know if you'd want to see that. Thanks. So after the Anti-Fairies are defeated, Calamitus uses Jimmy's Gene Splicer to combine himself with Jorgen, in which he wants to use his Big Bang Bomb to destroy the world, which he will of course be safe from hiding under a desk. It's weird though that despite being one of his rare appearances on the show, they never chose to bring back Calamitus's main character trait, that being he never manages to finish anything he starts. That obviously makes for a less interesting villain, as you know his main weakness right from the get-go. But in a cartoon like this, I think there was room for some jokes to make out of that. Hell, even Nicktoons Unite brought that back for cutscenes. Either way, they steal Cindy and turn her into a hideous-looking fish. Gross. And so Timmy and Jimmy have got to finally team up to save the day. Their plan is pretty genius too. I like that it actually involves some established lore from the Fairly OddParents. That being that they're gonna break so many of the rules at once that Jorgen can't help but get angry and try to break free, giving them the perfect opportunity to unsplice them.
Been waiting all day to say this. I wish Timmy Turner was gone!
$20 says that line was originally, I wish Timmy Turner was dead, and the network made them change it, you know, God forbid a child learn of this concept in a less serious context. Little Billy, your grandmother just died. If only Jimmy Neutron had introduced me to this sooner. Either way, Jorgen breaks free and Calamitus is defeated. Now there's just one thing on everybody's mind.
Who are you going to the dance with, girl?
With that, Cindy finally comes to understand that Timmy isn't the genius he claimed to be, and Jimmy is still an asshole. And so as the perfect workaround, Jorgen helps the trio enter a polyamorous relationship, as they have an interdimensional dance party where they can dance with Cindy at the same time. The shiny teeth for some reason.
Hi, Mrs. Neutron.
God, I always forget that came from this episode. And with that, we end the second Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. I don't know, I still think it holds up pretty well. Sure, the older I get, the more I'm able to point out issues with it. Again, still having that problem of having two different villain plots that don't mesh well together at all because of their insistence on pulling that betrayal angle. But I don't think it hurts it. At least the Calamitous plan is by far the more evil, wanting to murder everyone. And so I think it's a fine escalation after the anti-fairies are defeated, especially after he's been pretty much treated as a joke the entire time. Honestly, I wouldn't really change a thing about it. It's the perfect blend of Fairly Odd Parents and Jimmy Neutron. I mean, you barely even notice how Jimmy dominant this series is, given the nature of the Fairly Odd Parents. Timmy has friends, sure, but not nearly as closely as Carl or Sheen are to Jimmy. Same with love interests like Cindy, I think it would be weird to try and shove AJ, Chester, or Trixie into this kind of thing, because they're not constants in Timmy's world. They focus more often than not solely being on Cosmo and Wanda. And so I think they did as good a job as they could have here at balancing both shows at once. In my opinion, it's pretty fantastic. And viewers only seem to agree as this special managed to do even better than the first, reaching 5.5 million viewers. You wouldn't think it, as Butch almost never talks about the other two, but I think that's more so a result of him not being involved in the writing process of this one, and so it's much harder for him to take credit for something he didn't have as much involvement in. But again, this is the one Nick would air most of all on TV. I always saw this on. I remember only seeing it once as a kid, went years without watching it again, then saw they were going to be airing it the same day I had Gaelic football practice, which is pretty much just soccer and rugby mixed together, and I didn't even fucking like doing it, look at me. My parents were forcing me to do it, but I begged, I pleaded, to please let me miss that one lesson as I just really wanted to watch the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 2. And you know what they said? No. So I was sad. I think this was the peak of the Fairly Odd Parents in popularity. I wouldn't say the same about Jimmy, as nothing can top the amount of hype Nick were putting into the movie, but maybe the peak for the TV series. But in regards to Fairly Odd Parents, this is definitely when they were pumping the most into that show. Season 4 is when they were giving it their all in general. They were riding high off the success of Abracatastrophe, a special I would love to talk about on a longer level sometime because I actually think it's one of the weaker Fairly Odd Parents events. But it was so popular that it led to Nick giving them fucking specials galore. Season 4 not only had a couple of 22-minute events like Shelf Life or the Big Superhero Wish, but in that one season, we got the first Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, School's Out the Musical, which is fantastic, but also Channel Chasers, what many believe to be the absolute peak of that show. I know some folks have started to disagree with that statement, which I'd argue is simply a result of the kids who grew up with the later seasons getting old enough to voice their opinions online. But anyways, the main claim is that the ending wouldn't work as a series finale as it shows Timmy to be a bad parent, just like his, learning nothing from his experience and giving his kids an evil babysitter too. But like, that's the whole fucking point. It's meant to be a full circle kind of moment. The whole special builds up to this idea that upon Timmy giving up Cosmo and Wanda, all his bad memories went along with them. They changed his life for the better and gave him nothing but a completely pleasant memory of his childhood, shown through the conversation he has with Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin. Because of this, he has no memory of how evil Vicky was, or how neglectful his parents were. And upon growing up, his childhood sensibilities went away as well, clearly shown through him looking at the photo of his childhood self, looking at his now normal fish, and it bringing him genuine happiness for a reason he just can't understand, before getting distracted by his newfound adult responsibilities. It's the perfect bittersweet end to that series, and I don't really understand this strange revisionism, where it's actually bad on the most surface level. Okay, wait, what's this video about? Season 4 was hard to top, is my point. And it wasn't topped. Season 5 had a lot of great episodes, and of course it contained the amazing second Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, along with later having the third, even having Fairly Idle, which I think is pretty underrated. Okay, I'm just realizing now, I should just make a video sometime about every Fairly Odd Parents special, there we go. But the point, again, is, from here, the Fairly Odd Parents went on a slow decline, with Nickelodeon deciding that the series, along with Jimmy Neutron, would be coming to a close, choosing to end things out on one final hurrah. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 3. So let's take a look and see if it would have been a satisfying end to either show. For years I've been looking for this Fairly Odd Parents fishbowl. I couldn't believe it was real, but no duh, of course it would. It's the most obvious merchandise to make from that show. I had just accepted for years that I was never gonna own it. Who the fuck keeps their 20-year-old cheap-ass plastic fishbowl laying around? But then a couple weeks back, I saw it on eBay, complete in box. Fucking mashed that buy button. I had to get it. Also find the matching glow-in-the-dark gravel that goes along with it, and got ready to have my own Cosmo and Wanda. Then I posted a picture of it to Twitter and everybody begged me not to put a fish in it. Apparently small bowls aren't good for them. So the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 3, I mentioned it before, but the release schedule for this was insane. Coming out in July of 2006, only around half a year after the last, which means both of them were bound to be in production at the same time for a period. I guess Nickelodeon saw the success of the first and figured they could make this a regular event as long as both shows were still on the air. Both of them were cancelled that same year. This is often seen as the weakest Jimmy Timmy Power Hour, and so I'm curious to see if my thoughts on it have changed much, because I loved this one as a kid. I really love how low the stakes are at the beginning. Jimmy is just looking through other dimensions and stumbles upon Timmy, who's just been rejected by all two of his friends, Chester and Edge.
Those guys are practically my only friends in this universe. You know what that means?
You should be a better person.
With this, he has the bright idea to once again head to Retroville to meet up with Cindy Vortex. And so it's another battle of Brian versus Average to see who can get to her house first.
Timmy will be just an average kid who no one understands.
Somebody should write a song about that.
That line sucks. They don't focus on this for too long though, as they soon find out Cindy isn't even home. And so what are they gonna do?
Wanna hang out? Are you nuts? Have you gone completely mental? You wanna hang out with me, the two of us together? Maybe. Okay, sure.
If this was the first Power Hour, I probably wouldn't have liked how quickly they just become buddies here. But honestly, after 2 hours of them endlessly bickering with each other, I'm down for it. Enough time has passed with the two interacting for me to find it kind of charming that they're so quick to let bygones be bygones. Feels true to how actual kids are. There's no real goal set up this time. All Timmy wants to do is hang out with someone. And so I like that the plot here is almost meta in a sense. They've saved their worlds on multiple occasions, and the act of running into each other isn't nearly as epic as it once was. And so it's fitting that this special has a pretty laid-back feeling to it. They're just looking for something to do.
Jimmy and Timmy are friends? Do you know what this means? Do you? Do you?
Whereas the others felt like they took a little long to get to the point, this one just beelines directly towards it. It only takes 2.5 minutes for Jimmy and Timmy to run into each other. And they don't even give a shit when Cindy does come back. They've finally come to understand bros before hoes.
I'm like catnip to those boys.
They poop on you in a box?
That's kitty litter, you idiot!
Gross. Honestly, they're kind of sadistic this time around. They both start teaming up to beat their respective lower-tier villains, and realize how overpowered they are when together. Jimmy cancels out Cosmo and Wanda's rules with his science, and Timmy's magic can assist Jimmy's inventions in ways he couldn't normally accomplish. It feels like this was when they wanted to insert the most fan service into these. It's really cool getting to see them casually just tackle Jimmy's foes and seeing Timmy riding along in the Robo-Walker. And it's sweet having them go inside a Crimson Chin comic and seeing Jimmy get his own superhero alter ego.
I hate the new Jimmy-Timmy friendship.
Damn, so close. They get bored pretty quick though. It's like playing GTA on God mode. It's not as fun as you think. And so what do they do to counteract this? Well, they're gonna create their own supervillain, played by the carrot from Daddy Daycare, alright. It's fucked up. They're literally creating life just for the purpose of being able to torture it. And torture it they do. By accidentally giving it emotions, he's actually a pretty swell guy. And as a result, Jimmy and Timmy frustratedly try to beat the meanness into him. Problem is, they've accidentally made him adaptable. And so after long enough of screwing with him, he does become evil, now with the ability to steal their powers and use it against them. It's so fucked up, this is the nicest guy in the world. He gets fucked over by them twice and is still willing to forgive them, in which they just ditch him again, what the fuck? It may seem lame to have a meet-up villain, you know, instead of pulling from another set from each show. But it works in my opinion. I mean, who else were they gonna use as a threat here? Vicky? Beautiful Gorgeous? Maybe they could have gone full meta and had the villains be Butch Hartman and John Adidas. Or even, you know, the Nickelodeon executives. What if the plot was the ultimate fuck you, and it was about Timmy and Jimmy teaming up to stop their shows from being cancelled, ending with Jimmy dying at the end and only Timmy living on. Okay, wait, that's just the ending to Sonic Adventure 2. But also, having one bad guy seriously helps the pacing. Instead of having a fear-giving one show's bad guy the spotlight over the other, they're able to focus solely on the new guy, helping that stop-and-go issue I felt the previous two specials slightly suffered from. It's also really apparent that he was designed as a Fairly OddParents character first. He looks atrocious in the Jimmy Neutron style. He only appears in that world for like 10 seconds total, but you can see that exact same texture and lighting issue on him. It's awful. Also, I mentioned how ridiculous having someone like Vicky as a villain would be here, but then I was immediately reminded of how there are actually more than 3 Jimmy Timmy Power Hours. Yeah, that's right. The Nickelodeon magazine, which was running at the same time, actually decided to have a couple of their own crossover events between the two characters. We have the Jimmy Timmy plus Vicky Cower Hour, which sees Wanda and Cosmo leave for a fairy reunion, with Timmy being stuck with Vicky all by himself. Coincidentally, though, Jimmy Neutron steps out of Timmy's trash can, in which he's seeking out Cosmo and Wanda to use their magic to help him with an invention. With them gone, however, he instead decides to use a spare X-Boy Gamebox controller, yes, that's really what it's called, to invent a behavior modifier to make her nicer. When they get tricked, however, they have to think like kids instead of relying on magic or science, and so spray her down with shaken up soda bottles. And that's it. What fun! Another sees Timmy and Jimmy pit science versus magic. I like how this one keeps Jimmy in his own art style since they're still in his universe. That was a neat touch. Gimmick this time is Jimmy has to use magic and Timmy has to use science. Doesn't work out well. Finally, we have Dimension Intervention, my personal favorite. I love the implication here that Jimmy and Timmy just continue to hang out in each other's universes off screen, or after doing it so much they begin noticing certain elements from their worlds intertwining. Hugh looks more like Timmy's dad, Crocker is now his teacher, he finds out his name is now Jimmy Turner and he's got giant buck teeth. It gets super wild by the end with the entire Nickelodeon multiverse colliding, all the Nicktoons start invading before Jimmy manages to reset everything, in which we later learn the same thing was happening to Timmy too. Even makes a fun little nod to SpongeBob at the end. Why did this have to be a 2-page comic? Why couldn't we ever get that fabled Nicktoons movie? It writes itself. These comics are fun, obviously not a substitute for watching the specials or anything, but I don't know, I think there was an opportunity here to animate some of these. Maybe play them as bumpers like they used to do with the Jimmy Neutron shorts. They'd only be like 30 seconds each, who cares? Okay, back to the third one. Chester and AJ are here too. Not sure why. Obviously, it's to feed into the lesson by the end of Jimmy and Timmy learning not to take advantage of their friends, but they just don't do much. Feels like their only reason for being here was to balance the Jimmy-Timmy characters a bit more. But really, it's kind of weird to see them go on an adventure like this. I think it's the only time in the entire show where they've ever gotten involved in the action. I don't like AJ here especially, they've boiled him down to a single joke. They begin by establishing he's about to freeze himself to be unfrozen in the future, but Chester wakes him up right after. So uh-oh, he thinks he's in the future. And so every single line involving AJ has to have that gag. He just keeps repeating how the future is weird, or the future, it's the same as his time, isn't that so weird? And everyone lets this continue until the very last quarter where Libby just tells him he never went to the future. And he believes her immediately. They could have just done that at any point in time. You're great. Also, spoilers, but by the end, the villain who they later dubbed Shirley, which he then takes back and renames himself the villain whose name isn't Shirley, turns Cosmo and Wanda into humans, in which Chester and AJ never question who these random tiny adults hanging out with them are. Huh.
Not everybody who has a mustache is evil. Your mother has a mustache. You should give him a mustache. And a remote.
Look, it's that one funny reaction image. Are you reacting yet? Wait, why does the lighting look so good here? Also, might I say, they just look abysmal in the Jimmy Neutron style as well. The bright pink lips on AJ are questionable at best, and Chester's giant fucking overbite, while accurate, looks horrible when translated to 3D. It really does seem like both of their models were pretty rushed. This all hints at something greater, which I'm sure I'm not the first person to point out, but the Timmy to Jimmy ratio in this special fucking sucks. We spanned maybe 5 collective minutes in Jimmy World, and the rest is all Fairly Odd Parents. It's so mundane too. There are so many friends in this one that they don't have anything for them to do. It's so focused on Timmy and Jimmy that all we get for them are scene after scene of them just sitting around talking about Timmy and Jimmy. It's all these guys have going on in their lives. Their entire subplot revolves around trying to have fun without the supposed centers of the universes, I guess. I'm also not a fan of what they do with Jimmy later on either, as when the villain whose name isn't Shirley learns about his adapting abilities. You know, I guess you could call him his adaptability. He steals Cosmo and Wanda's magic like I mentioned before, but also Jimmy's intelligence, now putting Jimmy somewhere below Cosmo's IQ somehow. But all that means is for the rest of the special, Jimmy is not acting like himself and near useless, just another Cosmo.
Now he's a villain and a genius. Just like Dr. Phil.
I wouldn't have minded that much if this obstacle wasn't present the entire rest of it. He never even gets it back by the end. I guess the canonical end to Jimmy Neutron is him becoming a dumbass. We've truly come full circle. Anyways, I can't imagine the intent was to have it lean so heavily in the Fairly Odd Parents' favor. I think it was sadly just a result of circumstances outside of their control. See, by the end, Shirley, sorry, I apologize for dead naming. The villain whose name isn't Shirley decides he's gonna suck everybody from both universes into this white void where they'll all be forced to hang out with him, even deciding to suck in objects from the 2 dimensions. All of these objects, however, appear in the Fairly OddParents style, most being pretty lazily done too, like Jimmy's lab looks fucking stupid. They took everything from a front-facing angle when that's rarely how they're approached in the show. It's sad because I get what they were going for. They wanted it to be a blend of 2D and 3D. We're seeing the 2D Fairly OddParents characters on a 3D plane. That's a great idea. I just think we were missing more from Jimmy Neutron other than just being 3D. The issue of the Jimmy style barely appearing would have been mitigated if these objects appearing in this world were 3D models. Honestly, if they really wanted to do something special for this finale, even though it probably would have taken more work than they had the time or budget for, but this should have been an expansion on that ending from the original where they shake hands. We should have seen all the Jimmy Neutron characters in 3D interacting with the Fairly OddParents characters in 2D. That would have blew people's fucking minds, mine at least. I wonder if maybe that was the original plan and got scrapped at one point. But even then, it's not bad. Also gives them the opportunity to give some of the tertiary cast a moment to interact, which they've never really done yet, like Timmy and Jimmy's parents. And I enjoy that moment where the villain whose name isn't Shirley starts matching up different character archetypes. That was fun. I also have to wonder if the reason they lessened the amount of CG here was because of the increased production going on at DNA Productions, the studio who animated Jimmy Neutron. Around this time, they were also working on The Ant Bully, the film that would go on to pretty much bankrupt them. But it actually came out in the exact same month as Jimmy Timmy 3, and so perhaps working on that and finishing their final order of Jimmy Neutron episodes was stretching them thin. Maybe they just couldn't find the time. Again, which sucks because after the 16-minute mark, there is only maybe 30 seconds of total CG in the rest of the episode. That short bit with the villain whose name isn't Shirley, and the very last shot. Something else I noticed here is that the writing seems way closer in style to the Fairly OddParents this time around. Again, it's interesting to see these specials and how much each show changed between them. Like Cosmo and Wanda bickering way more this time around, it's half their goddamn lines. It's not at that point of being unbearable yet, it's still somewhat funny, but I don't know, they really could not stop toning that down. Still though, what I think puts this special above the first in my opinion, despite the lower stakes, is the comedy. This is by far the funniest out of the three. What it lacks in epicness, it more than makes up for by just having better gags.
I don't have any... That's not mine. That's not me.
It's just brought down by, again, having that Fairly OddParents problem where all the characters are way too simple. Everyone only talks about Timmy and Jimmy. The two of them are complete assholes and don't realize they're neglecting their friends, but have that big sappy turnaround where they say how much they care about them. Even the ending is pretty forced too, with the two of them apologizing to the long name guy. But like, they only feel bad because he's about to destroy their universes.
See? Now you respect me, because I'm a threat.
Either way, their plan here is actually pretty smart, with them manipulating him into removing his weapons by forcing him into situations that would cause him to adapt them away. He now lives in Dimsdale, which will never be brought up again, and with that, the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour 3 comes to a close. Jimmy's still a dumbass. And grabby, apparently. While I can see folks not liking this one as much due to it not being as cool or epicular, I think it more than makes up for it by just being fun. Again, we've had 2 hours of high-stakes situations. We've seen Jimmy save Timmy's world and Timmy save Jimmy's world. Them ending out in a fun romp of the two finally getting along and realizing how destructive they can be when putting their minds together, only to be stripped of their most powerful assets, is a cool idea. Even if going all out on a giant finale would have been sweet, honestly, I didn't even consider that. It's really weird we never got to see that calamitous Crocker team up. That makes way too much sense. You know, mad scientist and third grade teacher. There's no viewer amount for this special, at least not readily available online like the other two, but I have to imagine it did similarly, if not a little worse than the last. They were so close that each show was still relatively as popular, but also so close that I'm sure there wasn't as much spectacle around the event, which is evident by how subdued the commercials are, not treating this nearly as cool as the last two. And with that, Jimmy Neutron and the Fairly OddParents were cancelled. Nickelodeon had just switched CEOs at the time, and I'm sure they were looking to spark some new life into the network. Also, again, DNA Productions had went bankrupt around that same time. Not that it would directly result in Jimmy getting cancelled or anything, but I'm sure to them the hassle of trying to find a new CG animation company in the mid-2000s who could adapt to the show quickly would have been way more of a headache compared to just greenlighting something new. At least then they can create some marketing buzz around a new series. Then they tried to bring it back 4 years later, and everybody hated it. Then they brought it back for a car commercial. Wait, why does this look better than the actual show?
What else can your dimensional thingamalizer change, Jimmy?
Well, what the fuck was he gonna do? Which really sucks because apparently they had some pretty big plans for the series' potential 4th season, which included fully leaning into the serialization. Evil Jimmy would have returned, Jimmy and Cindy would become an official couple. Their ideas sounded extremely ambitious and their natural evolution for the series. You know, too bad though. You get the ant bully. On the other side, Nickelodeon also cancelled Fairly OddParents, which Butch claimed to be a result of SpongeBob being more successful. Which I can't imagine being fully accurate. I'm sure that was a factor, but I also think they could have just thought the series had run its course. It had 80 episodes and like 5 TV movies, time to call it a day and move on to something new. But then, Butch had a genius idea. Let's add a baby. Yeah, Butch decided to drudge up an idea he had planned for the also cancelled Fairly OddParents theatrical film, which had a finished script I wish I could read someday, and which he planned for it to end with the godparents having a kid. And that seemed to be just what Nick were looking for to rejuvenate interest in the show. And with that, it continued to run. For a little bit longer, in which they cancelled it again. And so Butch had a genius idea. Let's add a dog. And then it got cancelled again. Point being, Fairly OddParents stuck around, which is both fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate because, well, I like the Fairly OddParents. Poof wasn't that bad. But also unfortunate because it's hard not to deny that Jimmy Neutron deserved it more. They had an actual plan, a story they wanted to tell, and so it's sad that the show that got to continue was the one that went on to just throw shit at the wall and see what stuck. Who knows if Nick will ever try to revive Jimmy Neutron again? The voice cast have been advocating for it for years, and I'm sure we'll see something eventually. Certainly as we're approaching the 2000s nostalgia era. But if not, I hope fans of it can take solace in knowing that the show ended while it was still good. Imagine being in my shoes. The Jimmy Timmy Power Hour trilogy isn't perfect. You know, I'm not the first to admit that. At the same time, I think all 3 of these still managed to be great in spite of their issues. For whatever problems I can talk about regarding pacing or the eventual imbalance of crossing over the 2 shows, nothing will ever change the fact that these events will go down as some of the most monumental moments in Nickelodeon history, doing something completely unheard of at the time and pushing the boundaries for what to expect from a kids network. Nickelodeon from this era just felt like they got it. They knew exactly what would have you on the edge of your seat as a kid. And for that, I'll always look back on these specials fondly. I used to be obsessed with these things, and I'm sure some of you were too. I would watch those Watch Mojo top 10 lists all the time and thought I was some kind of baby genius for not understanding the totally legit fact that Bikini Bottom is actually a nuclear testing site. And that's why all the fish can talk. There's nothing in the cartoon to imply that isn't the case, so it must be true. Although a lack of facts have never stopped him from rising in popularity before, I still see that dumb Fairly OddParents theory all the time. Poof is purple, which means he must be one Decimo's kid. Like, dude, I think you're forgetting one crucial aspect of that episode.
And that's why this theory is incorrect.
These theories go from being completely dense, but at least can remain as a fun headcanon for yourself that you know isn't real but appreciate the creativity anyway. Or they're just, is Dr. Eggman Donald Trump? Is Tails in love with Sonic? Am I legally allowed to drive a vehicle? And so join me, won't you, on this nice little trip down memory lane. To a simpler time when everything just seemed so much more believable because it was on the internet. When theories like Ed, Edd and Eddy being in purgatory, or Adventure Time taking place in a kid's coma, made you feel a bit more mature for liking children's media. Okay, so, first of all, I blame you, TikTok, for this utter nonsense somehow reaching the mainstream again. In our current era of split-second attention spans, the youth of today don't have time to sit down and watch the top 10 of anything. Half of them can't even count that high. That brain power has instead gone towards memorizing the entirety of Skibidi Toilet. And so because of that, we've seen a massive spike in podcast clips where 2 people discuss various dark cartoon theories. No, the new trend on TikTok and YouTube Shorts is to completely script a conversation between 2 people, where one tells the other their theory that they clearly just took off a BuzzFeed article, and act as if they're hearing it for the first time. It's so vapid and completely interchangeable. Timmy Turner is Danny Phantom. Really? No, of course not, you fucking idiot. Use your brain, you goddamn clown. I vividly remember a few years ago, I was sitting in my kitchen, minding my own business, when my sister's boyfriend at the time walked in and was like, "Here, you should make a video about how Candace from Phineas and Ferb is actually insane. I read somewhere that Phineas got hit in the face by a bully so hard that it killed him. And now she imagines them in the backyard building inventions." That would be well good, mate. And I had to sit there and listen to this with a straight face before saying, yeah, maybe someday. I guess that day has finally come. I don't know, these things just really fascinate me. It so obviously tries to appeal to the most impressionable and naive people out there. And so we have adults in this world who are desperately trying to capitalize on dumb people being dumb. And it works. They have to treat this theory so seriously when you know in their head they're aware of how stupid it is, like they didn't just pull it off Reddit.
Many kids and adults find cartoons captivating and fun. However, some schools of thought believe that popular cartoons and animations depict more than what's ordinarily seen on the screen.
Oh yeah, schools believe, of course they do. A pattern you'll pick up on as well is that most of these theories can be categorized into the same 4 or 5 different themes, and they're always the most broad shit imaginable. Dream theory is the absolute epitome of this. Like, you can take literally any show, movie, book, video game, anything on planet Earth and say, what if it was all a dream? And suddenly, everyone started running with it. And so I'm going to split these up into fun little topics and go through a plethora of these dark cartoon theories. And we're going to give them a rating from plausible to fucking stupid. Starting with, the characters actually represent something dark. Now, this topic is pretty self-explanatory, and that's because it can mean goddamn anything. You'll soon come to notice that a majority of these theories just rely on throwing around the same few buzzwords over and over. A lot of these are just glorified creepypastas, but they're the thinking man's creepypasta. One of the most famous examples of this would have to be with SpongeBob, who, by the way, unsurprisingly has by far the most crappy fan theories out there. You know, there are lesser known shows in the world where a dark theory would be appropriate, but you rarely see it because it's just not gonna get the clicks. Like, look at a show like Jimmy Two Shoes. It aired on Disney XD where I lived in the 2010s. Got a couple seasons, nobody really cared, and that's it. But that show sees the main character living in a place called Miseryville, run by the evil Lucius, with the main character trying to bring joy and optimism to the depressed town members. You could make a dark theory that this place is supposed to be hell, that Lucius is actually Lucifer, aka Satan, which you can then corroborate with the fact that the show was originally going to be for adults, with the premise being Jimmy is just a regular kid on Earth who gets hit by a car, accidentally sending him to hell. They never went with that and turned it into a kid's cartoon, but obviously remnants of that are still littered throughout the show. Therefore, that's a good damn theory if I do say so myself. Thank you, Mark, I appreciate it. But many of these theories completely forget, or most likely, ignore the fact that you can't just bring up a theory and have that be it. You gotta actually show some evidence that supports it. And I think that's gonna end up being the main factor that separates the plausible theories from the shit. Case in point, the main SpongeBob characters represent the deadly sins, ooh. This theory states that each of the 7 main SpongeBob characters, well, represent the 7 deadly sins. However, the funniest part about it all to me is that even the people who like to entertain this theory can't even agree on which character is tied to what sin. The links in the SpongeBob 7 Deadly Sins theory are unnervingly easy to make. Apparently not, because not even your article can avoid how confusing some of these comparisons are. So there's a few obvious ones, you know, Patrick is lazy, so he's sloth. Mr. Krabs likes money, so he's greed. Plankton is envy, since he wants the formula. And that's it. The rest are either interchangeable or fucking stupid. So get this, Gary, you know, the snail, represents gluttony, because he's only really seen eating. Now, is that because he's gluttonous, or because he's a pet who can't talk? Sandy and Squidward both alternate between pride and wrath. Both can be seen being pretentious at times, but also aggressive, so I guess whichever you think fits more is the real answer. And finally, SpongeBob is lust, because he shows a lot of love for his friends. Yeah. Although every time I see someone post this list, the characters are all different. For such a popular fan theory, there's really no consistent consensus. Like, look, this one doesn't even put SpongeBob anywhere here. Pearl instead represents lust, because she likes boys. Fellas, is it sinful to be attracted to the opposite gender? Yes. This one also replaces Gary with the equally unfitting Mrs. Puff for gluttony. I wonder why. Mrs. Puff is shown to adore food, from chocolate cake to pasta, and is fat. You're gonna notice too how these things stretch the truth to try and make it fit as much as possible, like shoving a square peg through a circle hole. Like, no, because in one random episode Mrs. Puff expresses that she wants to have some leftover pasta for dinner does not equate to her adoring food. The simple fact here is that when making a show, you gotta give each character their own personality trait. And usually, in an ensemble like this, you want to make them all stand out from each other. So of course they're gonna all exhibit traits that can be easily skewed to correlate with these sins. And this isn't to say all cartoon theories are automatically dumb. Even if clearly not true, there is fun to be had in knowingly looking way too deep into this shit. Like the SpongeBob skin theory, which I know you've had in your recommendations before. I could not escape that thing. It draws attention to the frequency of gags in the early seasons of SpongeBob that feature a character being shown wearing skin of another fish, and how it seems to be a normal occurrence with nobody batting an eye. My only issue with it is that the theory is completely open for interpretation beyond that. Like on its own, that's not even a theory, you're just drawing attention to a pattern. Are all these skin jokes coincidence? Or pattern? Coincidence. But this is still a quality scripted and well thought out YouTube video. Same with a lot of those Alex Beal ones that get millions of views. Those are fun because you can tell it's just a guy having fun and trying to entertain these outlandish theories and seeing how well they apply. You know, it's usually not just, what if SpongeBob characters were buzzwords? Like, I about the one that claims all the SpongeBob characters represent different drugs. Because I'm 14 and I think drugs are spooky.
No, Pac-Man, drugs are bad!
SpongeBob is into mushrooms because imagination. And Patrick loves that motherfucking kush. But then they say Sandy is the only sober one, which is why she gets very annoyed when visited by SpongeBob and Patrick, as they are usually high. But aren't they like friends in the show? Okay, we'll take a break from SpongeBob after this one, but I gotta give it a mention because it's yet another one that's so reliant on you being intrigued by buzzword. How about the SpongeBob characters all represent mental illnesses? SpongeBob has ADHD. Sure, that was definitely never an intentional decision, but if someone wanted to identify with that, then that's cool. Patrick has an intellectual disability. Wow, you really tried to work around saying that word. Sandy has borderline personality disorder because of mood swings and impulsivity. Like, I don't know what cartoon they're watching. Screen Rant, you literally said last article Squidward was the one with mood swings. There's like 400 episodes of SpongeBob. Just because a character acts differently between two of them doesn't mean they have mood swings. Squidward is depressed. Mr. Krabs has OCD, and Pearl has body dysmorphia. I think we're gonna move on for now. I love that someone's job was genuinely to sit down and acknowledge a dumbass theory like this, credited to a user, Strawberry Ooh Girl. What do you tell your parents your job is? As we all know though, SpongeBob isn't the only cartoon prone to receiving these lame representation theories. Winnie the Pooh is a really popular one, which states all the characters in the 100 Acre Woods represent different mental disorders. What the? Pooh has an eating disorder. Piglet has anxiety. Tigger has ADHD. Owl has narcissism. Rabbit has OCD. And Eeyore is depressed. I mean, just look at him. And Christopher Robin is the root of it all, suffering from schizophrenia and imagining all his talking animal friends. I have to say, this one at least is more believable than the SpongeBob ones, but I think that's more so just a result of Winnie the Pooh being a baby show for babies, and so of course the character personalities are going to be more simple, and therefore can fit into these diagnoses more. Also, there's like a million mental illnesses out there, so I'm sure if you tried hard enough you could diagnose anybody with one. We still prefer to think that Christopher Robin had real talking animal friends he spent his time with, because that sounds a lot less crazy. We think? Thanks, Yahoo. Bing would never stoop this low. I was surprised to see just how many dark fan theories there are for the Fairly Odd Parents. But with a show so out of this world and magical, I guess it makes sense. Possibly the most famous theory out there is that Cosmo and Wanda aren't real. Dude, it's always drug or mental illness. If you want to make a good fan theory, just don't involve either of those and you're already a step above this crap in my book. So, apparently, because Timmy is so abused and neglected by his parents, he has to take antidepressants, which are manifested as Cosmo and Wanda, with Green Guy representing Zoloft and Pink Lady being Prozac, with them both being prescribed to help with anxiety and depression. The most obvious hole in this theory is, what's the deal with the magic then? Well, don't worry, because they've thought of everything. According to them, all the magic beings represent their own kind of drug. Dude, mixing the mental health theories with the drug ones, they're really breaking new ground. Jorgen von Strangle is steroids and Wandissimo is Viagra. Like, what? It really does seem like a case where these people just throw an idea out there based on a show's premise, and everyone runs with it without considering if it actually makes sense or not. Like, I get that most people making these theories are just having fun. That's cool. But there are people living among us who genuinely think this was the intention the creators had. My boyfriend told me about this, so I googled it and see this entire story. I kind of believe it now because I heard similar stuff about other shows in the past, just like Rugrats is Angelica being mentally ill. And those are different personalities and hallucinations inside her head, and the other babies don't really exist. There are other Fairly OddParents ones that I barely even want to entertain, but I feel like I must as I've begun seeing them everywhere, and there's one man to blame for that.
Hey Hart fans, Butch Hartman here.
So Butch Hartman, in an attempt to once again remind us that he made the Fairly OddParents, only him, for years and years has been entertaining each and every one of these theories, duetting TikToks and YouTube shorts where the person explains their point, as he just nods his head and scratches his chin. I don't think I've heard him say a single word in any of these.
If you see someone with a pupil in the show, they're a fairy.
What? I never noticed that.
Yeah, but this is where it gets really crazy. So if you look at Timmy's crush, Trixie, she actually has a best friend named Veronica. But if you look at Veronica's eyes, she has pupils. So the theory is that Veronica is actually Trixie's fairy in disguise.
This would be a decent little fan theory. Clearly not true, but who cares? It's a cool detail to point out. If it were true.
Every single kid and human does not have pupils, but every fairy, look at all of them, they all have pupils.
So, is the mayor a fairy too? Seems like the approach to making this theory work is to just act like this show has 4 characters. I like that this one claims,
but they also have pupils. That basically applies to all of the other fairies in the show.
While showing Jorgen, who doesn't have goddamn pupils. Dude, this theory makes so much sense when you think about it. If, you ignore all the ways in which it makes no sense. Also, she lives in her own house. We've seen that at least once. Got any explanation for this? Oh, what's that? You haven't seen the show since you were 7? Of course. The last one I see everywhere, and yet another that Butch continuously entertains, is that Timmy Turner is Danny Phantom. Apparently when Timmy was 13, he didn't want his fairies taken away. Even though the show states he loses them when he's 18, but he's planning ahead, I feel it. And so to keep his godparents, he wishes that he was Danny Phantom, with Wanda turning into Jazz and Cosmo turning into Frostbite. Who? Also, don't the parents of both protagonists look alike? No! Dude, like, what if Jimmy Neutron messed up on one of his experiments one day and turned everyone into SpongeBob? Dude, they both invent things, they both have idiot friends, Sheen wears a shirt, you know who else does? The only theory format I could understandably say is worse than these are the ones that just go with something so meaningless that you could literally apply to anything. And that is coma theory. Like the last, coma theory is pretty self-explanatory. You take a show or a movie and basically say, what if it was all a dream? There are 2 incredibly popular theories under this, and those are the Pokemon and Adventure Time ones. No, I have never seen the Pokemon anime, so I can't attest to how well this fits. The lore. What do I stuttered? So listen to this and let me know what you think in the comments. You know, the comments, that thing right under the subscribe button. Apparently at a certain part of the early episodes of Pokemon, Ash got hit by lightning, which according to this is when Ash gets put into a coma, being hurried to the hospital. This sparked a major changing point in the series' pacing and tone, with it getting much more lighthearted. This is because his medication has taken effect and stabilized his dreams into being idyllic? I don't know. Which would mean that Ash's fantasy of becoming a Pokemon master isn't actually happening. The other popular theory that floats around is related to Adventure Time, with it stating that Finn was a lonely boy. He had a poor family life and his only friend was his beloved dog Jake. Like, what do I even have to say? They speak for themselves. Regular show. In a coma. Shider. In a coma. You watching this? In a coma. Wake up. There is one single theory akin to the coma thing that I actually like, and it's because they go out of their way to build upon a plot point that the show actually establishes, and it comes from American Dad of all places. So in the season 6 episode Rapture's Delight, we see the events of the rapture unfold, with everyone getting sent up to heaven, only leaving behind those who are sinful. Like This Is the End starring Seth Rogen. Stan and Francine are 2 of these people left behind because of something they did early on in the episode, and thus we see a massive time skip of them being in the post-apocalyptic future, where they end up becoming involved in Jesus' war against the Antichrist. Stan sacrifices himself to save his wife, and because of that, he's sent up to heaven for putting others above him, where he's granted with his own personalized room in heaven, which manifests itself as his greatest desire. And so he walks in, and everything is the way it was. Finding a way to reset the status quo, but that's still a sweet ending. So this theory suggests that the events of this episode didn't actually reset. Instead, it claims that every episode after this is just happening in Stan's personalized heaven. And hey, it's not the most sound theory out there, especially since the ending to that episode has Claus the fish dead on the wall, but still I like this one. You can tell it was just a genuine fan making a fun observation. It works. And again, it's at least better than the coma theories we went over.
He was treated poorly by his family and only ever felt loved by his dog, who he would tell all his crazy fantasies to. When his dog—
You know, this is almost as depressing as the Candace has schizophrenia theory with Phineas and Ferb. Oh my god, I can't avoid it! Alright, fine. This takes us into our next topic, which I'm calling the imagination theory. Once again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out. And it is yet another that can seemingly be applied to theoretically anything. Noticing a pattern of these. Basically, aspect of a show, say it's a part of a character's imagination. Why? Schizophrenia or one of those other wacky things. Like the American Dad one, however, this isn't without the rare theory that I actually enjoy, such as the Courage the Cowardly Dog one. It's strange how such a terrifying kids cartoon can have such a quaint and wholesome theory around it. Once again, Courage isn't a series I'm too familiar with. I was more of a Nickelodeon kid than Cartoon Network, but people theorize that the more unsettling moments of the show, you know, all this stuff, isn't actually happening. And no, not because Courage is actually a metaphor for, I don't know, Percocets, or because it's actually all within a drugged up state before being put down. Instead, it suggests that perhaps none of this is really happening, because we're seeing the show from Courage's point of view. A little boring and clearly isn't real, but if someone had this as their own headcanon, I couldn't blame them. The other imagination theories, though, are fucking dumb. So it's been about 5 years since I learned about it, but I finally succumbed to looking up this goddamn Phineas and Ferb theory. My search history has forever been tainted. The FBI agents are probably fucking laughing at me right now. Phineas and Ferb are simply a figment of Candace's imagination. After not being able to handle Phineas's tragic childhood death, and Ferb having a disability that restrains him from talking or moving much, Candace creates a world in her head where Phineas and Ferb play together and create incredible things. This is why her mom is never able to see these things. They also claim Dr. Doofenshmirtz is Candace's psychologist who's trying to get her back to reality. So, it's just like every other one of these, huh? I hope people don't yet again take this as me being the fun police or anything. I'm aware most of these are just made for the joy of it. I just genuinely can't believe there's people who run with these things. Again, I have literally had someone in real life try to convince me this was true. Like, how do you exist? I guess maybe it harkens back to a time before the internet became so widespread, so involved in every facet of our lives. A time where you could hear a theory like one of these and not immediately go to the creator's Twitter only to see them say, lol, no. Maybe it reminds people of when they were kids. That feeling of having the wool being pulled over your head. That there's a deeper meaning to everything, and shows you your first signs that maybe the world isn't so clean and good. Like, I remember I used to be addicted to those crappy Illuminati confirmed videos. You know, the ones where they'd show the Starbucks mascot and be like, whoa, if you flip it upside down, it looks like a demon. And let me tell you, I've slept with one eye open ever since. There's just something unsettling about the idea of something being covered up right underneath your feet, being swept under the rug while you remain none the wiser. But at the same time, no, Tommy Pickles did not die due to stillbirth. According to this riveting tale, none of the babies in Rugrats actually exist. Instead, they're all figments of Angelica's imagination because of her parents' negligence. They could have just ended it there, but no, they knew they were writing gold. Chucky died with his mother. Tommy was a stillborn baby, which explains why his father, Stu, was always in the basement making toys for the son he never had. Finally, the DeVilles had an abortion, and so Angelica didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl, so she imagines both. I like how they're trying to act as if they're answering a question that never existed, like, oh, this explains why Stu is always inventing toys, and not because it's his job? Thankfully, one of the creators of the Rugrats was asked about this biting expose, with them saying, and I quote, "Fuck, you got it. That's what we intended the whole time. Finally, someone with a brain." No, of course not. They responded with the eloquently put, "No, it's not true. Thank you, Arlene, for your public service." Dude, I'm running out of creative names for these topics. It's impossible to make these things sound cool. So next, I'm going with the title Location Theory. Exciting. This one is a little more broad than the others. This can mean it's a theory about where the show takes place, or a theory about the characters going to a certain location. Look, I'm just trying to make it easy by lumping them together. You'll thank me for this. There are two incredibly popular theories about the towns certain cartoons take place in, and those are with Ed, Edd n Eddy and SpongeBob. Yet again. The Ed, Edd n Eddy one claims that the show takes place in purgatory, which would explain why the characters never leave the cul-de-sac, and why we don't ever see their parents. That's a neat idea if you don't think about it too hard. It's kinda cool to take this decision that was clearly done to reflect on the nostalgic endless summers of childhood and give it a darker meaning. However, the more you read, the more it kinda falls apart. So not only does this take place in purgatory, but each character in the show is also from a different time period. For example, Rolf is from the 1900s, at some point during those years, with his family's farm animals trampling him over. Yeah, dude, get sent to purgatory for that. Look where you're going. Eddie came from New York during the Great Depression, Ed's dad died in World War II, and Double D died in the 80s because of a chemistry lab explosion. They do this for all the characters, but the question I'm sure you're most intrigued to know the answer to is it real? So the SpongeBob one claims that the reason all the fish can walk and talk and sell burgers is because of a nuclear explosion that happened on the coincidentally named Bikini Atoll, where between 1946 and 1958, the US government actually detonated many nuclear bombs on the island, with some being underwater. Literally, the name is all that makes this one come off as plausible. And hey, it is a mighty fine coinky-dink, but then that's all it is. A coinky-dink. Like, I'm pretty sure we've seen many other locations in the SpongeBob universe where the sea creatures also talk. It isn't unique to Bikini Bottom. But again, it's another one that isn't trying too hard to be deep or serious or adult. So I enjoy it even though it's not true. This one I've seen mostly be used by environmentalist websites like, oh, you like SpongeBob? Then why are you killing him? So Pixar's Cars? I like to forget about it too. Well, how would you feel if I told you that it took place in a dystopian future where humanity is dead? You want a test of this theory? Me too. If you think about it, we have autonomous car technology coming in right now. It's getting to the point where you can sit back in the car and it drives itself. Imagine in the near future when the cars keep getting smarter and smarter, and after one day, they just go, why do we need human beings anymore? They're just slowing us down. It's just extra weight, let's get rid of them. But the car takes on the personality of the last person who drove it. Whoa, there you go. Oh, that's it? That's stupid. This might be the worst one yet. When in our history are we going to start giving cars mouths with teeth? Yeah, that'll make school trips fun. What about the one that states Scooby-Doo is happening during the Great Depression, which explains that the series takes place during an economic collapse? And that's the reason why all these rich and successful people are trying to spook people in silly monster costumes. Had me in the first half, not gonna lie. Okay, location theory was a lot dumber than I thought. I apologize for that. So I guess to end this off, I want to just rapid fire a few general dark theories that I couldn't find a place for anywhere else. Starting with, the Smurfs are anti-Semitic. Okay, no, we're not doing that one. The Krabby Patties are made out of crab meat. This one would actually be a kind of fucked up and cool dark twist on the show. Too bad Steven Hillenburg said there's no meat at all in Krabby Patties. Steven is Sans. No, yes, really. Sans is actually an acronym for Steven After Not Surviving. Moving on, Dexter killed his parents in Dexter's lab. This one is just filled with plot holes. It says after one of his experiments killed his entire family, he made replicas of them all. And that's why he doesn't want them knowing about his lab, so they won't get injured again. Only issue is, this theory also states that he made replicas that are indestructible, so why would he need to worry about them getting hurt? You had me, then you lost me. You got too carried away. SpongeBob has PTSD from his time in World War II. Toy Story 3 is a metaphor for the I think that's enough. I could go on. I really could. But I feel like there's only so many ways I can say, this sucks. Overall, cartoon theories can be a fun little way to further explore your favorite shows. I have nothing against the people who make these theories, but I really think that clickbait articles and soulless social media channels have beaten them into the ground so much that nobody can really take any of them seriously anymore. And that's a shame because... Well, no, I guess it's not really a shame now, is it? What are you still doing here? I said wake up.